Welcome to Legacy of Throne. Before we begin this extraordinary journey through centuries of empires, conquests, and forgotten civilizations, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you never miss our next epic story. On this channel, we uncover the rise of dynasties, untold wars, hidden kingdoms, and the secrets that shape the world as we know it. Subscribe now, because history belongs to those who choose to remember it. Tonight, we begin with a quiet thought. In modern times, when people list the richest figures in history, they often speak of Rockefeller with his oil empire, Bill Gates with his software fortune, Jeff Bezos with vast retail networks, Warren Buffett guiding markets. Each of these individuals held staggering wealth, measured in the tens of billions of dollars. Yet, when historians step back from modern numbers and look across the long span of human history, they consistently point to someone far earlier, someone whose riches were not stored in banks or stocks, but in the land beneath his feet, the caravans crossing his deserts, and the markets shaped by his choices. That man was Mansa Musa of Mali. His generosity on a single journey once pushed Egypt's economy into decline for more than a decade. Such is the quiet scale of the story we are entering tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you'd like, share your location and the time where you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Long before Musa came to power, West Africa already carried a steady rhythm of trade. People in many parts of the world rarely imagined this region as a major center of wealth. Yet, the forces that shaped Mali had been quietly building for centuries. The land was expansive, stretching from the Atlantic coastline deep toward the Sahara. Here, in a landscape of savas, slow rivers, and sandy plains, a remarkable combination of natural resources gathered in one place. The Sahara, though barren in many respects, held vast fields of salt, sometimes stretching so far across the desert that workers carved slabs from the ground like stone. In hot climates, salt meant preserved food and good health. So, its value was not symbolic, but practical. It supported life wherever it traveled. South of these desert fields lay territories where gold rested near the surface in amounts that impressed even seasoned traders. Many accounts described miners lifting away the upper soil, washing it in pans, and seeing gold appear with surprising ease. By the 19th century, when mineral experts tried to estimate how much gold had been taken from the region under Mali's early rulers, they calculated that the empire may have produced no less than 3,000 tons over time, a figure that helps explain why Musa, who ruled during the peak of this prosperity, became so well known for extraordinary wealth. Trade linked everything together. Caravans guided by experienced desert travelers moved north with gold and south with salt, forming a chain that connected many regions. Camel drivers knew how to read the desert signs, noticing faint marks on the dunes or slight shifts in the wind. These long journeys shaped a world in which Mali was not isolated. Instead, it participated in a continuous exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures stretching from the Mediterranean to West Africa and beyond Central African trade routes as far as Congo and Chad. Traders who passed through described markets busy with people speaking different languages, each group bringing its own goods and customs. The earlier Ghana Empire had once dominated this region, collecting taxes and controlling access to gold. When Ghana declined, Mali grew in its place, shaped by leaders who organized towns, villages, and vast stretches of land under a single administration. Over time, Mali's influence spread from the Atlantic coast into areas bordering the desert, reaching the edges of places that would later become Sahel, Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, and Niger. The empire gained strength through stability, supported by families who balanced local authority with imperial obligations. People followed their own customs but contributed to Mali through trade, taxes, and loyalty, a system that encouraged cooperation rather than constant conflict. By the early 14th century, when Musa was still young, Mali's prosperity was clear to travelers. Caravans crossing its lands often spoke of the security they found along the routes. Villages and towns benefited from food grown from the rich soil along the Niger River and its many branches. This river, bending across the land in long curves, acted as one of the empire's most valuable resources. During the rainy season, it flooded gently, leaving behind soil rich enough for farming. During dry months, it narrowed, giving people room to set plant gardens along the banks. Fishing, farming, and river transport formed an everyday rhythm that made life sustainable even across vast distances. Islamic influence also shaped the region. Traders from North Africa brought manuscripts, teachings, and new forms of scholarship. Some communities embraced these ideas quickly. Others continued their older customs alongside the newer practices. Mali managed this mixture through flexibility, allowing both traditions to remain. The ability to balance set old and new would later become one of Musa's strengths as ruler, for he lived in a world where faith, law, and cultural practice came together gradually, not abruptly. Into this setting, Musa was born. His early years took place in a royal environment where the movement of gold, salt, livestock, and textiles flowed steadily around him. But what truly prepared him for leadership was not gold itself. Instead, it was the understanding that wealth came from many hands. Miners working near the rivers, workers carving salt from desert fields, herders guiding animals across grassy plains, and traders linking far-flung communities. Musa saw that Mali's fortune rested on cooperation and routine rather than grand displays. Long before Musa ascended to the throne, a remarkable event drew the world's attention. Though no one could know it would eventually lead to his rule, the reigning Mansa at the time, Abu Bakr II, became fascinated with the Atlantic Ocean. He repeatedly asked advisors what lay beyond its horizon. When no one could answer, he decided to investigate. He ordered 200 ships to be built and staffed, with more than 8,000 people, provided enough food and water for a journey of 2 years, and declared that he would not return unless he discovered the far edge of the sea. Before departing, Abu Bakr appointed Musa as regent to manage the empire in his absence. The decision reflected trust, but also revealed how unusual the expedition was. When the fleet sailed westward, it disappeared from view, swallowed by the vast ocean. Months later, only one ship returned, carrying 12 survivors. The captain reported that after months at sea, they encountered a powerful current in the open Atlantic. He watched helplessly as ship after ship was pulled into a massive whirlpool and vanished. The current, later suspected by oceanographers to be part of the North Atlantic's dangerous flowing systems, had overwhelmed the fleet. No other vessels escaped. Abu Bakr was believed to have perished with the others. With the emperor gone, Mali faced an uncertain moment, but the people accepted Musa's leadership. In 1312, he officially became Mansa Musa, ruler of an already wealthy and complex empire. The world beyond West Africa was undergoing its own difficulties. Parts of Europe were weakened by internal conflicts and shortages of vital goods. In contrast, Mali thrived. Its salt exports remained abundant. Its gold fields remained productive, and its trade routes continued to operate smoothly. In this period of global imbalance, Mali's wealth became even more significant. The empire stood at a crossroads of economic currents linking Africa to the rest of the known world. Because Mali had such valuable resources, Musa inherited not only a throne but responsibility for networks of trade that touched many regions. Salt caravans carried goods to trading centers where people exchanged spices, cloth, beads, and livestock. Gold dust moved north in steady quantities and helped fuel economies far from Mali's borders. With every transaction, the empire strengthened its position. The scale of this activity formed a foundation that would support the extraordinary events of Musa's later reign, including the famous pilgrimage that would astonish Egypt. Before that journey, though, Musa spent years observing and shaping the structures of governance he had inherited. He learned how to balance competing interests, how to work with regional leaders, and how to keep trade routes safe. He saw that an empire could not remain strong without steady guidance and without attention to small matters that affected everyday life. Farmers, miners, and traders played crucial roles. Without their work, the glittering tales of Musa's wealth would not exist. The Mali Empire of Musa's early years was not defined by dramatic events, but by a steady unfolding of opportunity. Its land produced salt, its rivers produced food, its soil produced gold, and its networks produced influence. Beneath this calm exterior, a transformation was preparing to take shape. A transformation that would soon draw the attention of North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. The world would learn of Musa not through legend alone, but through eyewitnesses who saw his wealth spread across cities, deserts, and seas. This peaceful beginning sets the stage for his extraordinary life. From here, the story continues without interruption, moving into the world Musa shaped with careful set leadership and a sense of purpose that extended from the Atlantic to Mecca. Roots of a golden empire. The Mali Empire that Mansa Musa inherited did not rise suddenly. It formed over many generations, shaped by geography, long-distance trade, steady political organization, and a culture that trusted in the slow building of prosperity. To understand Musa's world and the scale of wealth that later followed him across the Sahara, we need to look closely at the foundations laid long before he ascended the throne. These foundations rested on the land's natural riches, the quiet work of countless individuals, and the patient growth of a realm positioned at the crossroads of Africa's most valuable commodities, gold and salt. The soil of West Africa supported more than farming. It hid rivers of metal beneath its surface, especially in regions south of the Sahara. Many gold fields lay near streams where miners scraped away the top layer of earth and washed it in shallow pans. Because the gold lay close to the surface, families and small groups could work independently, creating a continuous supply rather than relying on a single central mine. Over time, this abundance gave rise to an entire economy built around movement and exchange. Traders traveled between villages, collecting dust and nuggets that eventually reached officials who weighed and taxed them. These taxes did not feel abstract. They passed directly into the treasury that would one day belong to Musa, forming the basis of an empire whose name would echo far beyond its borders. Salt flowed in the opposite direction. While gold traveled north, salt traveled south. The Sahara's great deposits provided enormous slabs of this mineral, each one as heavy as stone. Workers carved them from sun-bleached plains where nothing else grew, shaping blocks that caravans strapped to camels for long journeys. The value of salt is easy to overlook in cooler climates, but in the harsh heat of the Sahel and Savannah, it was essential for survival. It preserved meat, balanced diets, and supported daily life. For some people, salt was so precious, it functioned as a unit of trade. Even gold dealers respected it. The pairing of gold and salt formed a stable economic cycle that strengthened both sides of the desert. The territory that would eventually become Mali sat ideally between these resources. To the north lay salt mines, to the south, gold fields. Through its center flowed the Niger River, winding across hundreds of miles in long, slow curves. This river gave the empire fertile soil, fish, and a natural highway for transporting goods. Towns sprang up along its banks, each one connected by boat and by footpaths tracing the edges of fields. Because the river broadened into wide marshlands in some areas, communities learned to adapt to seasonal changes. They planted crops when the waters receded and harvested quickly before the river rose again. This predictable rhythm made for reliable farming, which in turn supported population growth. The villages varied in size, but often shared similar patterns. Houses built from mud brick or packed earth stood in clusters around open spaces where people cooked, cloth, or shaped pottery. Herds of cattle grazed nearby, and fields of millet stretched toward the horizon. Markets acted as the heart of daily life. In these open areas, people exchanged grain, beads, leather goods, fish, textiles, and metal tools. Traders traveling from distant regions entered these markets carrying specialized goods. Copper from the Sahara's edge, ivory from forest regions, cola nuts from the south, or dyed cloth from workshops near the desert. Each item formed part of a vast network that linked Mali to lands far beyond its borders. As the region grew more interconnected, towns began to expand into cities. Among them, Timbuktu gained special significance. It began as a small settlement near a bend in the Niger, but gradually became a center of trade where merchants from North Africa, West Africa, and the Sahel met. They brought manuscripts, textiles, salt, gold, and spices. Although Musa had not yet been born during the earliest stages of Timbuktu's rise, by his youth, the city was already known as a dependable waypoint for caravans. Nearby settlements Gao, Jen, Oda also grew into important commercial and cultural centers. This urban development did not occur abruptly. It unfolded over generations, shaped by reliable trade and stable governance. The empire that preceded Mali, known as Ancient Ghana, laid the first major foundation for this economic structure. Ghana had dominated the region through its control of trade routes and gold fields. When Ghana declined, its fragments did not disappear. They transformed into smaller states, some of which became part of early Mali. Leaders who unified these groups understood the value of continuity. Instead of dismantling established systems, they built upon them. Local chiefs retained influence. Griots maintained oral histories, and Islamic traders continued to move across the region, bringing not only goods, but written scholarship. By the time Sundiata united Mali in the 13th century, the empire possessed fertile land, experienced traders, structured leadership, and access to major trade routes. Sundiata's successors strengthened these systems. They organized officials to oversee taxes, caravans, military forces, and justice. Under their care, the empire's borders expanded, stretching, eventually from the Atlantic coast through regions that now belong to Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Chad. Some territories became vassal states, contributing goods, taxes, or soldiers when needed. Others joined voluntarily due to the economic advantages of alliance. This blend of authority and cooperation formed the backbone of Mali long before Musa's ascent. With such resources, Mali developed not only economic stability, but cultural strength. Islamic influence continued to grow, especially among merchants and scholars. Manuscripts reached West Africa through trade routes, offering teachings on law, astronomy, mathematics, and history. Mosques appeared in growing towns, some small and others built with impressive care and detail. These structures became part of the everyday environment that shaped Musa's upbringing. Even though local practices remained influential, Islamic scholarship added new layers of learning to the region's traditions. The empire's wealth, though remarkable, did not consist of idle treasure. It circulated constantly. Though later legends would exaggerate some tales of gold, the everyday reality was already extraordinary. By the early 14th century, many traders traveling across the Sahara wrote of Mali's prosperity. They described markets filled with imported goods, Chinese ceramics, North African textiles, spices from distant lands, and items crafted by local artisans. Many accounts came from merchants who had no reason to embellish. Their descriptions came from simple observations during their travels. When Musa was still a child, this world of structured prosperity lay quietly around him. The royal court existed not as an isolated palace, but as the administrative center of a vast economic machine. Officials managed caravans, monitored trade, weighed taxes, and organized supply routes. Wealth flowed steadily through their hands, not in the form of coins, but in goods, livestock, salt slabs, and gold dust. Musa witnessed all of this from an early age. He observed how careful record-keeping ensured that the empire functioned smoothly, and how the balance of authority between local leaders and central administrators created unity across long distances. Although Musa would later become the most famous ruler of Mali, he did not emerge from a vacuum. He came from a lineage shaped by centuries of development. The empire's strength lay in its layers: agricultural reliability, trade networks, cultural flexibility, administrative stability, and natural wealth. This structure made it possible for Musa to build on a foundation far larger than any single individual. It also explains why, when he eventually organized his pilgrimage to Mecca, he could gather thousands of people and transport vast amounts of gold, because the empire had been producing, trading, and storing wealth long before he sat on the throne. One detail often overlooked is just how deeply embedded these systems were. Historians estimate that Mali may have mined 3,000 tons of gold under its early rulers. They point to evidence gathered over centuries of observations. Such a number does not refer to a single source or a single ruler. It reflects a long chain of production reaching backward through time. By Musa's generation, gold had become more than a commodity. It was part of the empire's identity. Every caravan that crossed the desert, every trader who walked its markets, and every official who weighed a tax contributed to a larger story of economic continuity. The salt industry, too, played its role with remarkable steadiness. Workers in the desert carved blocks from ancient deposits left behind when prehistoric seas dried up. These blocks were transported to cities where salt was valuable not only for food, but for trade. Some communities used salt as a form of currency, exchanging it directly for other goods. Because salt was essential, its trade remained reliable even when markets for other items fluctuated. This stability supported families, merchants and rulers alike, eventually giving Musa the political confidence needed to pursue ambitious projects. All these elements came together to shape an empire that rested not on conquest alone, but on a deep interconnected economic system. Musa grew up watching caravans arrive and depart, watching goods transition from dusty camel bags into palace storerooms, and seeing markets bustle with energy. He likely listened to griots recount the deeds of earlier rulers, learning how the empire's prosperity had been built gradually through cooperation and careful stewardship rather than heroic battles. These observations gave him a calm understanding of leadership, one that would later define his style as ruler. When people today speak of Mansa Musa as the richest person in recorded history, they often imagine a single fortune accumulated by a single man. But the roots of that wealth were far older and far broader. They stretched across landscapes shaped by river silt, desert winds, and centuries of trade. They existed in the hands of miners, farmers, traders, camel drivers, scholars, and local leaders who kept their communities running with quiet dedication. Musa's greatness did not lie merely in possessing wealth. It lay in inheriting an empire ready to use that wealth to shape cities, scholarship, and diplomacy. By the time Musa reached adulthood, Mali stood as a powerful empire built on strong foundations. From its gold fields to its salt mines, from its cities to its rural villages, from its riverbanks to its desert caravans, every part contributed to the whole. These roots supported him through the extraordinary events that would soon follow, events that would carry his name across continents and into the chronicles of distant lands. Musa's childhood unfolded within an environment that rarely appears in dramatic accounts, but played an enormous role in shaping the ruler he would eventually become. The royal court of Mali was not an isolated palace surrounded by silence. Instead, it was a living, shifting center of administration, ceremony, instruction, and daily labor. Children growing up inside such a space encountered something more complex than luxury. They experienced a continuous flow of people, each performing tasks essential for the empire's functioning. Musa entered this atmosphere as a young boy, with few expectations beyond learning what it meant to live under the sprawling weight of duty, trade, and tradition. The court's crowded nature came from its central function in the empire. Officials traveled from distant provinces to report on tax collections, disputes, harvest conditions, and caravan traffic. Their arrival brought a mixture of accents and clothing styles that created a visual map of the empire's broad reach. Some wore the garments common to river regions. Others used fabrics obtained from desert merchants, and a few carried the fine textiles imported from North Africa. Musa witnessed these variations long before he understood their significance to him. At the beginning, they were simply the patterns and colors surrounding him each day. As he grew older, these details settled into meaning. A caravan leader's travel-stained garments conveyed experience earned through months moving across deserts. A provincial noble's decorated robe signaled authority rooted in old traditions. A scholar's simple attire symbolized the value placed on study. These observations helped Musa absorb the structure of his world without direct instruction, simply by observing the distinction between those who governed, those who traveled, those who studied, and those who worked. The palace complex itself reflected the layered society it oversaw. Built from earth materials that stayed cool under the heat, the building surrounded open courtyards where daily activities took place. Children played in the shade of wide walls. Women prepared food in shared spaces. And guards monitored the passageways connecting one area to another. Musa spent many hours moving through these courtyards, seeing at close range how the empire functioned on the level of everyday work. Craftsmen repaired tools and weapons. Artisans shaped pottery for official use. Servants swept walkways and delivered food or messages to officials. Though these tasks seemed ordinary, they formed the quiet structure of governance. People depended on one another for support, and the empire depended on all of them. In addition to physical tasks, the court served as the place where knowledge moved from one generation to the next. Griots, the custodians of memory, played a central role in Musa's early life. They were more than storytellers. They carried genealogies, legal precedents, historical accounts, and moral teachings. Their knowledge was not written, but preserved with remarkable precision through memorization and repetition. Musa likely encountered them during ceremonial settings where they recited long histories of kings, battles, alliances, and the founding of important towns. The tone was often steady, the words clear, and the purpose unmistakable: to pass on the collective understanding of how the empire came to be. For Musa, exposure to griots offered something unique. He absorbed stories not as entertainment, but as part of his education. These accounts describe the responsibilities of rulers who came before him. They portrayed the empire as a system built by patient, set decisions, steady leadership, and cooperation with local authorities. Because Go emphasized continuity, Musa learned that leadership required respect for past agreements. If previous rulers had gained loyalty through fair rule, then future leaders should do the same. This worldview shaped his understanding of authority long before he exercised it. Alongside the Go were scholars who taught the principles of Islamic learning. They explained the basics of law, history, and theology. Musa, set, encountered their teachings in quiet rooms where students sat on mats reciting passages from memory. Though not every child in the court received the same level of instruction, Musa's position ensured that he would learn from these teachers. They introduced him to ideas that traveled great distances before reaching Mali. Through them, he learned of cities like Cairo, Tunis, and Mecca, places where scholars gathered, argued, copied texts, and built institutions. These glimpses of the wider, set, Islamic world planted early seeds of curiosity that would later grow into his desire to make the pilgrimage. Beyond learning, Musa experienced the realities of administration at close range. Officials from across the empire arrived with reports and requests. They brought documents written or dictated that describing matters ranging from agricultural output to disputes over grazing land. Sometimes they carried samples of goods collected as taxes, bundles of grain, baskets of kola, nuts, set, boats of cloth, or small bags of gold dust. These items passed through the palace, where record-keepers logged them for redistribution. Musa observed the process more than he participated in it, but the exposure helped him understand that the wealth of Mali was not a vague abundance, but a carefully managed system. He also witnessed how delicate this system could be. When caravans were delayed because of weather or conflict in a distant region, officials needed to adjust expectations. When a set harvest fell short due to poor rainfall, the court had to decide whether to send supplies to a struggling province. When taxes arrived later appeared incomplete, envoys needed to investigate without causing unnecessary tension. These decisions required patience, discretion, and an awareness of how communities lived. Musa learned these lessons not from theory, but from watching the daily rhythm of governance. Life in the court also involved exposure to foreign goods. Traders arrived carrying items, set, rarely seen outside long-distance routes. Chinese ceramics with pale glazes, fine textiles from Persia, metalwork from North Africa, and small objects carved from ivory or ebony all passed through the center of administration. Musa grew accustomed to the idea that Mali belonged to a network far larger than itself. While most people lived in villages and towns, the empire's influence touched places across deserts, rivers, and seas. In this sense, Musa's upbringing differed from that of local, set, children elsewhere. He understood early that Mali existed not only for its own sake, but as part of a regional system dependent on trade, diplomacy, and movement. One of the most formative experiences of Musa's early years came from observing how his elders handled conflict. The court did not operate with constant harmony. Disagreements arose between nobles, between traders and officials, and between regions. When these disputes reached the palace, elders listened with care, weighing arguments, set, with attention to custom and precedent. Musa saw how decisions were made through negotiation rather than force. The process often required a calm voice, a steady mind, and the ability to maintain unity. These qualities would later define Musa's own leadership style, but their origins lay in these early observations. As Musa moved toward adolescence, his responsibilities increased. He assisted in small administrative tasks, gradually gaining an understanding of how information flowed through the set court. He learned to listen carefully and consider the broader impact of decisions. At the same time, his education included lessons in religious practice. Teachers instructed him in prayer, recitation, and reflection. These practices offered a grounding structure within the bustle of court life. They reminded him that rulers were not solely judged by how they governed, but by how they maintained their spiritual obligations. In this way, Musa developed a sense of humility that balanced the set authority he would one day hold. The diversity of people in the court contributed to Musa's social understanding. Travelers from northern regions brought accounts of Mediterranean economies, political difficulties, and shifts in trade routes. Visitors from southern forest regions described agricultural innovations, new trading centers, and changing local customs. Envoys from vassal states shared updates on their territories, noting the challenges they faced and the solutions they sought. This constant exchange helped Musa understand that leadership required awareness of lands beyond the palace walls. He learned early that the fate of Mali depended on regions far from the capital and on people whose names he might never hear. As he grew older, the court also taught Musa the weight of responsibility. Ceremonies marked significant events, accessions, harvest celebrations, diplomatic visits, and each occasion required the presence of the royal household. Musa often observed these events, respectfully, learning the gestures and expectations attached to leadership. He saw how rulers needed to interact with nobles, scholars, traders, and common people alike. These interactions helped maintain a sense of cohesion within the empire. Each ceremony demonstrated that leadership extended beyond issuing decisions. It required representing the empire's unity in both public and private life. Through all these experiences, the idea of Mali as a stable, prosperous, and influential empire settled deeply into Musa's identity. He internalized the belief that leadership involved guiding an already functioning system rather than imposing sweeping change. This perspective would later allow him to expand Mali's influence without disrupting its foundations. His later accomplishments, including the famous pilgrimage and the establishment of learning centers, arose from this careful balance between innovation and continuity. The crowded court of his youth had shaped him into a ruler, prepared to recognize opportunity without losing sight of responsibility. An important part of Musa's upbringing involved observing the empire's military structure. Although Mali's armies were not constantly engaged in conflict, they played a crucial role in maintaining order across vast territories. Commanders visited the court to report on border conditions, troop movements, and local alliances. Musa learned that military strength served not only to protect, but to reassure. When distant, provinces knew that the central government could support them in times of need. They remained loyal. Musa appreciated this stability without developing an over-reliance on force. His leadership would later emphasize diplomacy, wealth, and scholarly patronage rather than military expansion. During Musa's adolescence, he also encountered the early development of towns that would one day become centers of learning. Timbuktu, though still growing, attracted scholars and merchants who brought news of events in distant regions. Guinea served as an important trading link between the forest belt and the desert. Gao, on the eastern frontier, held strategic importance along the Niger River. These towns expanded their influence, gradually shaping the cultural landscape Musa inherited even before he took the throne. The architecture of his future legacy was rising quietly across the land. All of these elements, trade, governance, education, diplomacy, religion, and everyday labor, formed the crowded environment in which Musa grew. The palace was not simply a luxurious residence, but a complex center of interwoven systems. From early childhood, Musa gained a rare perspective on the empire's operations. He learned to appreciate the interconnectedness of economic cycles, the value of skilled administration, and the importance of mutual respect among diverse groups. These lessons gave him a calm, deliberate approach to leadership that would distinguish him in later years. His early life demonstrated that greatness rarely arises from sudden events. Instead, it emerges from environments where people build, organize, adapt, and cooperate over long periods. Musa's upbringing within a crowded court provided the foundation he needed to rule an empire whose wealth seemed astonishing even to foreign observers. When he later embarked on a pilgrimage that would spread his name across continents, he did so with an understanding formed by years of careful observation and steady learning. The young prince who moved through the palace courtyards, listening to go recite, watching officials consult ledgers and observing scholars teach students would grow into a ruler capable of guiding one of Africa's most remarkable empires. But before the world knew him as Mansa Musa, the richest ruler in recorded history, he was simply a child learning how a delicate and prosperous system sustained itself. In that crowded court, surrounded by workers, traders, scholars, and leaders, he found the silent lessons that shaped the rest of his life. Abu Bakr II's great expedition. The path that eventually led Musa to the throne of Mali began not with ambition of his own, but with a question that captured the curiosity of the empire's ruler at the time, Mansa Abu Bakr II. The question itself was simple. If a person kept sailing westward across the great ocean, where would the journey end? In a world connected mainly by established land routes and caravan paths, such a question did not arise, often. Yet Abu Bakr II had long been fascinated by the Atlantic, a vast body of water that stretched beyond sight from the empire's western reaches. Traders along the coast spoke of strong tidal patterns, unpredictable winds, and the sense that beyond the horizon lay something unknown. These comments were enough to stir the ruler's imagination. Abu Bakr II governed a wealthy empire with strong administrative systems and thriving trade. Gold continued to move steadily from the southern regions, while salt traveled north in heavy blocks. Caravans crossed the desert with regularity, and the Niger River supported agriculture and transport. With the empire stable, the ruler found space to explore questions that had little to do with immediate governance. His inquiry into the limits of the sea began as a curiosity shared with advisors and scholars of the court. They offered what knowledge they could, drawn from travelers' accounts and the writings of distant cultures. Yet none could provide, an answer that satisfied him. Reports varied too widely, and no one claimed to have sailed beyond the familiar coastal waters. As time passed, the question grew into something larger. The court recorded instances in which the ruler discussed the mystery of the western horizon, pointing out that knowledge of distant lands had always expanded through exploration. The Sahara had once been a barrier until caravans crossed it successfully. Rivers had once seemed impassable until boats navigated them, regularly. In this same spirit, the ruler wondered why the sea should remain an unanswered riddle. If vessels could be built strong enough and supplied with enough provisions, perhaps they could cross the great expanse and discover what lay beyond. With this thought, Abu Bakr II organized an expedition unlike anything Mali had attempted before. He ordered 200 ships constructed, each designed to carry both supplies and passengers. These ships were built using the knowledge of coastal boat, builders who understood how to craft vessels capable of withstanding tides, storms, and long journeys. The builders worked with steady diligence, shaping wooden frames, sealing planks, and preparing each ship for extended travel. Alongside the ships, vast quantities of food and fresh water were prepared, enough to support thousands of people for up to 2 years. The expedition eventually numbered more than 8,000 individuals. They included sailors, craftsmen, navigators, workers, and attendants. Their task was to explore the Western Ocean and determine whether another shore existed across its expanse. The project required immense logistical coordination. The empire gathered grain, preserved meats, filled water vessels, prepared tools, and organized navigation equipment. Musa, still serving as a royal prince within the court, watched these preparations with interest, though not yet burdened with governing responsibilities. He understood the scale of the endeavor. Few rulers would risk such resources on an expedition whose outcome was unknown. Abu Bakr's vision, however, rested on the idea that Mali's prosperity allowed for exploration beyond traditional boundaries. Before departing, Abu Bakr II appointed Musa as regent, entrusting him with the administration of the empire during his absence. This decision was practical, but also symbolic. It demonstrated confidence in Musa's capacity to oversee a realm that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Even at this early stage, Musa was recognized not only for his lineage, but for the steady disposition that characterized his presence in the court. The responsibilities he received as regent would prepare him for challenges yet to come. The day the fleet departed, it moved along the coastline in a long procession. Observers described rows of ships stretching as far as the eye could see, their sails catching the light as they turned toward the open sea. The departure marked a moment of anticipation, though no one could predict the outcome of such a journey. Life in the empire continued normally after the expedition left, with Musa fulfilling his duties and officials managing trade routes and regional affairs. But the absence of the ruler created a sense of expectation that lingered in the background of daily life. Months passed with no word from the fleet. In an age without long-distance communication, silence was neither unusual nor conclusive. People waited with patience, trusting that the expedition would return when its mission was complete. Yet, the longer the silence continued, the more uncertainty grew. Eventually, a single ship reappeared along the coastline. The vessel carried only a handful of survivors, 12 people in total. Their return drew immediate attention, and they were brought before Musa to describe their experience, though later retellings would elaborate on the tale. The essential account spread clearly through the court. According to the surviving mariners, the fleet had sailed westward for many months, encountering strong currents and unfamiliar winds. One day, they came upon a vast body of water, where the current pulled strongly in one direction. The ships entered this flow, and the survivors described how vessel after vessel vanished ahead of them. They did not see storms, rocks, or land, only a powerful current drawing each ship forward, until it disappeared into a large, circular disturbance they interpreted as a whirlpool. No ship that entered it returned. Recognizing the danger, the leader of the last ship turned away, using all their remaining strength to escape the current. Only this vessel managed to break free and sail back toward familiar waters. Years later, oceanographers studying historical currents suggested that the fleet may have encountered part of the North Atlantic's powerful oceanic circulation. These waters funnel through complex patterns of movement capable of overwhelming vessels unprepared for such forces. While the exact circumstances remain uncertain, the account shared by the survivors fits what is now known about the strength and unpredictability of certain Atlantic currents. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. The fleet perished, and the ruler did not return. The responsibility of leadership therefore passed to Musa. In the early 14th century, with the empire stable and prosperous, the transition appeared smooth. Musa became Mansa Musa in 1312. His accession did not come through conflict or challenges, but through this unexpected conclusion to a daring expedition. The court acknowledged the change, and the empire continued its operations without disruption. Musa now faced the task of maintaining the systems that supported trade, agriculture, and administration, while guiding the empire toward its next stage of development. At the time Musa ascended the throne, Europe was facing shortages of important resources due to internal conflicts and economic disruptions. These shortages heightened the value of gold, which played a central role in connecting markets across continents. Mali, possessing abundant gold fields and stable trade networks, therefore occupied a position of increasing significance. Musa inherited an empire functioning at the height of its economic power. Salt caravans continued to travel to distant trade centers, exchanging their loads for goods from Chad, Niger, Sudan, Congo, and Central Africa. Gold dust continued to move north, making its way to cities around the Mediterranean. Mali's natural resources shaped global perceptions of its strength. Accounts from travelers such as traders from North Africa described the empire as a well-governed land where markets overflowed with goods. They recorded details of local products, imported items, and the orderly conduct of trade. Musa assumed control of a world where gold circulated widely and where salt sustained economies across vast regions. This circulation of wealth did not exist in isolation. It connected Mali to broader systems in which Mediterranean cities, North African ports, and Middle Eastern markets all played roles. During his initial years as ruler, Musa focused on stabilizing the empire after the unexpected transition. Although Abu Bakr II's departure had caused no immediate disruption, such a significant change always required careful management. Musa reviewed administrative procedures, strengthened relationships with regional leaders, and ensured that caravan routes remained secure. He approached governance with the same calm, steady approach that he had shown as a prince. His years observing the court's operations helped him proceed with confidence. He did not attempt sweeping reforms. Instead, he reinforced the systems already in place, understanding that a well-functioning empire relied on continuity. Musa's leadership style developed quietly. Observers later described him as a ruler who acted with caution and deliberation. He listened closely to advisors, weighed the effects of decisions, and made judgments that reflected both the needs of the empire and the realities of its resources. His early reign marked a period of reinforcing structures, improving communication between regions, and managing the constant movement of goods and people across the empire's territory. These efforts strengthened Mali's stability and prepared the way for the significant developments that would later define his rule. One of the most notable aspects of Musa's reign during this period was his commitment to religious learning and administration. Islam had long been present in Mali, but under Musa, its structures gained greater organization. He supported judges, scholars, and teachers who helped integrate Islamic principles into legal and educational contexts. This did not replace local customs, which continued to hold influence across many communities. Instead, Musa ensured that Islamic scholarship complemented existing traditions. This balanced approach allowed the empire to maintain unity across its diverse population as he consolidated power. Musa also strengthened relationships with regional leaders. Many provinces and vassal states operated with a degree of autonomy, contributing taxes and soldiers to the central administration, but managing their own affairs. Musa respected this arrangement, understanding that overly strict control could lead to friction. Instead, he maintained open channels of communication and relied on trusted officials to oversee matters requiring imperial attention. This approach helped the empire remain cohesive despite its vast size and cultural variety. During these early years, trade remained the foundation of Mali's prosperity. Salt caravans continued their journeys through the Sahara, and gold continued its steady movement toward markets across northern Africa. The empire's position at the crossroads of major trade routes gave it influence beyond its borders. Musa observed these patterns closely. He understood that the strength of the empire depended on maintaining the conditions that allowed trade to flow freely: safe roads, fair taxes, and stable governance. These principles guided his decisions and shaped his long-term vision for the empire. In this period, Musa did not yet draw the attention of foreign chroniclers. His rise to power, though significant, appeared gradual and orderly. It was not until later, when he undertook his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, that his name spread widely across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Yet the pilgrimage would not have been possible without the stability he established in the early years of his reign. The foundation of his later achievements rested on this period of consolidation, a time marked not by dramatic events, but by careful administration and the strengthening of existing systems. The memory of Abu Bakr's expedition remained in the background of Musa's rule. It symbolized both the possibilities and the uncertainties of exploration. While the expedition had ended tragically, it represented the curiosity and ambition of a ruler willing to test the limits of the known world. For Musa, the lesson was likely complex. He respected the courage behind the venture, yet he governed with a more grounded approach. He inherited an empire that required constant attention to balance, and order. Where his predecessor had sought answers in distant oceans, Musa turned his attention to the structures that supported everyday life. In the years following his accession, Musa's reputation within the empire grew steadily. Leaders in distant regions recognized his fairness and stability. Traders appreciated the safety of the routes under his authority. Scholars found support for their work. As long as gold continued to flow, Mali remained at the center of regional economies. Musa's challenge was not to introduce wealth, but to manage and direct it responsibly. These years prepared him for the transformation that would soon bring Mali into the center of global attention. When he eventually organized his pilgrimage, an undertaking whose scale astonished even the most experienced travelers, he would rely on everything he had learned during his early reign. The ability to organize thousands of people, coordinate supplies, and manage enormous quantities of gold arose from years of administrative practice. The pilgrimage did not appear suddenly. It was the natural extension of a ruler who had mastered the art of governing a prosperous and interconnected empire. But before that moment arrived, Musa continued to strengthen the foundations of Mali, building on the work of generations before him. His early reign demonstrated that leadership began not with spectacle, but with attention to detail, patience, and respect for the structures that held an empire together. It was within this quiet period of preparation that the ruler who would one day astonish the world gained the steadiness required for the extraordinary chapters ahead. When Musa formally assumed the throne in 1312, the transition carried a quiet weight that reflected both the stability of the empire and the unusual path by which he had reached power. Abu Bakr II's disappearance at sea had left no successor other than the regent he had chosen before embarking on his westward journey. Thus, without conflict or challenge, Musa inherited control of one of the largest and wealthiest empires in the medieval world. This moment, though smooth, held great significance. A ruler shaped by years of observing, administration, trade, ceremony, and scholarship, now faced with the task of guiding a complex system whose prosperity touched many lands. Musa's ascension came during a period of broad contrast between Africa and Europe. In the early 14th century, several European kingdoms experienced economic strain. Internal conflicts, resource shortages, and disruptions in trade made precious metals increasingly valuable. Gold especially held great importance in Mediterranean economies. The need for gold to sustain currency, banking, and trade networks grew more pressing as Europe faced instability. In contrast, Mali stood at the height of its abundance. The empire's gold fields supplied the metal in quantities unmatched anywhere else. This difference in circumstances created a situation in which Mali, though geographically distant from Europe, played a quiet role in shaping economic conditions far beyond its borders. For Musa, the day-to-day reality of taking the throne did not involve immediate transformation. Instead, it required understanding the machinery of governance he had now officially inherited. The empire's administrative structures had been developed over generations. Local chiefs oversaw territories. Caravans obeyed established routes. Taxes moved through predictable channels, and scholars supported legal and educational institutions. Musa's earliest task was simply to ensure that everything continued functioning with stability. He met with officials, reviewed reports, and confirmed the positions of trusted administrators. His leadership style leaned toward careful continuity rather than abrupt reform. The empire's geography necessitated such an approach. Mali encompassed regions stretching from the coastlines of the Atlantic to the fringes of the Sahara. This vastness included forests, savas, river valleys, and semi-desert regions, each with its own customs, economic practices, and local authorities. A sudden change in policy could easily upset delicate balances. Musa understood that maintaining unity across such diverse lands required patience. His early decisions therefore focused on reinforcing existing relationships. He ensured that provincial leaders retained authority in matters traditionally under their control while central administration remained responsible for trade, taxation, and diplomacy. Trade remained the empire's lifeblood. Under Musa, the movement of salt continued steadily. Caravans traveled north across the Sahara, carrying large slabs cut from the desert mines. These slabs moved through staging points where they were weighed, recorded, and taxed. In return, merchants brought textiles, copper, and manufactured goods from North Africa. The steady rhythm of this trade allowed Musa to observe how wealth behaved not as a static possession, but as a flowing current. Gold left certain regions, salt left others, and in return, goods from across continents entered the empire's markets. Villages and cities alike benefited. As ruler, Musa did not attempt to interfere with this cycle. Instead, he aimed to protect the roots that sustained it. While trade continued, Musa also worked to strengthen communication across the empire. The empire's size often made the dissemination of information slow. Messages traveled by foot, horse, or river. To improve coordination, Musa encouraged clearer record-keeping and regular reporting among officials. The royal court functioned as the central point where all information converged. Over time, these efforts made it easier to detect potential issues, whether related to border disputes, market fluctuations, or caravan delays. Though such administrative improvements left no dramatic stories behind, they greatly contributed to Mali's long-term stability. As he settled into his duties, Musa also positioned his court to better support scholarship and religious practice. Islam had become increasingly integrated into Mali's political and intellectual life. Judges trained in Islamic law presided over disputes in cities, and scholars copied legal and historical texts brought by traders from northern Africa. Musa strengthened these institutions by offering support to teachers and jurists, yet he did so without imposing uniform practices across the empire. Many rural communities maintained long-standing traditions unaffected by legal reforms in the cities. Musa judged that unity did not require uniformity. This balanced approach allowed the empire to honor its cultural diversity while benefiting from the scholarship and structure brought by Islamic administration. One of the important aspects of Musa's early reign was the reassurance it offered to foreign traders. When rulers change, uncertainty often follows, especially for merchants, whose livelihoods depend on long-term trade relations. Musa ensured that foreign traders from North Africa and beyond could continue their work without disruption. He guaranteed safe passage along established caravan routes and maintained the taxes and duties familiar to merchants. This consistency reinforced Mali's reputation as a dependable partner in regional commerce within the empire. Musa's leadership gained respect gradually. His quiet, steady manner made him a reassuring presence in the court. Instead of seeking immediate recognition or pursuing large public works in the early years, he listened carefully to advisors, studied the needs of various regions, and shaped policies that reflected long-term priorities. Over time, local leaders understood that he valued both tradition and effective administration. They recognized in him a ruler committed not to personal glory, but to the well-being of the empire as a whole. One area Musa observed with particular interest was the condition of urban centers such as Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen. These cities were growing steadily through trade and scholarship. Timbuktu, in particular, attracted both merchants and students. Though it had begun as a seasonal settlement near a river crossing, its strategic location made it a natural meeting point for caravans and scholars. Musa recognized that urban centers held the potential to become hubs of knowledge and economic activity. While he would later invest heavily in their development, he spent his early years as ruler learning how they already functioned. By understanding their existing strengths, he could later support them in ways that aligned with their natural growth. Throughout these formative years of his rule, Musa continued engaging with religious learning. He observed how Islamic scholarship had connected Mali to other parts of the world. He learned of scholars in Cairo, Fez, Tunis, and Mecca who wrote works on law, philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. He recognized that Mali had the potential to participate in these intellectual exchanges more fully. At the same time, he remained aware that scholarship required stable economic foundations. Cities could become centers of learning only when trade, security, and food supply remained strong. Thus, his early years focused on strengthening the conditions that would later allow such development. As Musa's rule progressed, news of Mali's wealth continued to spread. Traders returning to North Africa described markets filled with gold, prosperous towns, and orderly rule. Their accounts circulated among scholars and officials of the Middle East. At the time, some chroniclers already recognized Mali as a significant empire. Yet, few outside the region knew much about its ruler personally. Musa still lived in relative anonymity within global historical narratives. This would change dramatically in the coming years. But it is important to understand that the transformation did not come from desire for fame. Instead, it arose from a religious obligation that Musa took seriously: the pilgrimage to Mecca. Musa's growing commitment to the idea of performing the pilgrimage emerged gradually. Through years of exposure to scholars and teachers, he gained a deeper understanding of its significance. The pilgrimage represented both spiritual duty and a symbolic connection to a larger community. Performing it required substantial planning given the distance between Mali and the Arabian Peninsula. For a ruler, the journey carried additional responsibilities. He would need to ensure the safety of those traveling with him, provide for their needs across vast deserts and foreign lands, and maintain the empire's stability during his absence. Musa did not rush into this undertaking. He spent years strengthening the empire to ensure that when he eventually departed, its systems would remain secure. During these years of preparation, Musa also observed how European economies continued to struggle with shortages in precious metals. Gold supplies in some regions had diminished, and several kingdoms relied increasingly on imported metal to stabilize their currency. Unbeknownst to Musa at the time, his future pilgrimage would influence these economies indirectly. The vast quantities of gold he carried and distributed would eventually alter the balance of supply in certain regions. But in this early period of his reign, Musa focused primarily on internal matters, ensuring that the empire's wealth continued to flow in predictable patterns. The throne passed to him through the unexpected disappearance of Abu Bakr II had become secure under his quiet leadership. The empire remained prosperous, the trade routes active, and the cities steadily growing. Musa's strength as a ruler lay in his ability to act with caution and foresight. His decisions were rooted not in spectacle, but in understanding the interconnectedness of the empire's systems. He recognized that prosperity depended on balance between regions, customs, economic cycles, and administrative duties. This period of calm, stable governance formed the foundation for the next stage of his life. Soon, Musa would organize a journey that would astonish the Mediterranean world. The pilgrimage he envisioned would not merely fulfill a religious obligation. It would become a demonstration of Mali's wealth, a catalyst for architectural transformation, and a defining moment in global historical memory. Yet none of that could occur without the years of preparation and quiet leadership he demonstrated during this early phase. Musa's ascension to power, shaped by circumstance and guided by steady determination, reflected the character of the empire he led. The vastness of Mali required a ruler capable of patience. The diversity of its people required a ruler capable of understanding. The scale of its wealth required a ruler capable of restraint. Musa became such a leader not through sudden change, but through gradual development. The throne passed by the sea had become the seat from which he would guide Mali into one of the most remarkable eras of its history. In the coming years, Musa's decisions would extend Mali's influence in ways that reached far beyond its borders. The empire's wealth would reshape economies, inspire chroniclers, and leave impressions on mapmakers who sought to capture the world's most powerful rulers. But at this moment in his life, he remained grounded in the responsibilities of governance, preparing quietly for the journey that would define his legacy. Power of salt, gold, and trade. The Mali Empire's strength rested not on dramatic conquest or sudden discoveries, but on a long, steady mastery of resources that the wider world deeply depended upon. By the time Musa had stabilized his early reign, he presided over a realm whose wealth flowed from the ground, the rivers, and the desert in predictable cycles that supported millions of people. Understanding this system explains how the empire achieved the prosperity that astonished foreign observers and how Musa gained the financial means to embark on projects that reshaped cities and influenced economies far beyond Africa. The power of Mali came from salt carved out of desert plains, gold sifted from riverbeds, and trade networks that connected distant cultures. Under Musa, these systems operated with such efficiency that chroniclers later struggled to find a comparison strong enough to convey the scale. Salt began its journey in some of the most desolate sections of the Sahara. In regions where the ground shimmered with heat and the horizon stretched endlessly, workers carved enormous slabs from ancient deposits that had formed when prehistoric seas dried up. These slabs, often weighing as much as a person, were prized not for their appearance, but for their ability to sustain life in hot climates. Salt preserved food, prevented illness, and served as a medium of exchange for many communities. Salt was as essential as grain. Entire economies depended on it. The workers who carved these blocks performed a difficult task, yet their efforts sustained a trade cycle that reached deep into Mali's interior. Once cut, the salt slabs were loaded onto camels, forming caravans that stretched across the desert. These caravans did not race across the sands, but moved at a deliberate and careful pace. Experienced guides led them using knowledge passed down through generations. How to read patterns in the dunes, how to identify safe paths, and how to find wells hidden in vast expanses. At stopping points, merchants gathered under tents to exchange news, check their loads, and rest before continuing. Despite the harsh conditions, these journeys occurred with regularity. Traders trusted the routes and relied on their knowledge of weather patterns, winds, and distances. As the caravans advanced southward, the landscape changed. The barren expanses of the Sahara gradually gave way to regions where vegetation became more common. Grasslands appeared, followed by the more densely settled areas of the Sahel. Villages emerged near water sources, and traders encountered markets where people exchanged goods, such as cloth, grain, livestock, and pottery. The closer the caravans came to the Niger River basin, the more prosperous the markets became. The slabs of salt became increasingly valuable, and merchants prepared for the next phase of the exchange. Gold began its journey in the southern regions of Mali, where riverbeds held deposits that had been accumulating for thousands of years. Unlike many parts of the world where gold mining required deep shafts and sophisticated tools, Mali's gold fields often lay near the surface. Small groups of miners worked with simple methods, scraping away the upper layers of soil and washing them in shallow pans. Because of the relative ease of extraction, gold production remained steady over long periods. No central authority controlled the mines. Instead, miners sold their findings to local merchants, who then passed the gold along trade networks leading north. By Musa's time, historians estimate that Mali and its surrounding regions had already produced thousands of tons of gold. Though estimates vary, A common figure attributed to the era is approximately 3,000 tons extracted under Musa's reign and those before him. This immense quantity of gold flowed into trade routes that connected Mali to the Mediterranean world. The gold, dust, and nuggets passed through the hands of traders, officials, and rulers, contributing to the steady accumulation of wealth in the royal treasury. This exchange between salt and gold formed the backbone of Mali's economy. Caravans brought salt into the empire, where it was traded for gold. Merchants then carried the gold northward, often traveling to cities such as Cairo, Tunis, and Alexandria, where Mediterranean traders eagerly purchased it. In return, goods such as textiles, metal tools, books, and ceramics traveled southward into Mali. This cycle operated with remarkable consistency, and its benefits reached far beyond the royal court. Villages that produced grain-fed caravan workers, craftsmen made tools purchased by merchants, and scholars received imported manuscripts that enriched intellectual life in the cities. While salt and gold formed the core of Mali's wealth, the empire benefited from its favorable geography. The Niger River, winding through hundreds of kilometers, created an environment ideally suited for farming and transportation. Its annual flooding deposited nutrient-rich silt along its banks, allowing farmers to cultivate millet, sorghum, and beans in quantities large enough to support growing populations. Fish from the river provided additional food, and fishermen used narrow boats to navigate shallow waters. Because the river served as a natural transportation route, traders and officials could travel efficiently between major cities, towns. This connectivity strengthened political unity and allowed resources to flow where they were needed. Towns along the river served as centers of commerce. Timbuktu, though not yet the great center of learning it would soon become, was already a busy trading hub. Caravans arriving from the desert found rest and exchange there. Local markets offered grain, textiles, pottery, and imported goods. Merchants from other African regions mingled with traders from Morocco and the Middle East. The town's location at the meeting point between desert trade routes and river transport made it valuable long before Musa invested heavily in its growth. Jen, another important city, acted as a link between the river network and forested regions further south. Gao, located on the eastern edge of the empire, participated in trade that stretched into regions near the Niger's middle course. In addition to trade, Mali benefited from its political stability. Over generations, rulers had developed systems that balanced central authority with local autonomy. Chiefs and regional leaders retained control over their own communities, while the ruler oversaw matters such as taxation, justice, and long-distance trade. This structure allowed the empire to remain flexible while maintaining unity. Musa respected these arrangements and strengthened them by appointing trusted officials who ensured that regional concerns reached the central court. Taxation in Mali operated through practical and predictable means. Rather than collecting taxes solely in coins, the empire accepted goods such as grain, livestock, textiles, salt, and gold dust. Because many regions specialized in particular resources, the tax system mirrored the diversity of the economy. Towns located along caravan routes collected tolls from merchants, which were then forwarded to the court. River transport produced similar contributions with goods moved along its waters recorded and taxed at designated points. These systems ensured a steady flow of resources into the royal treasury. Musa's early years as ruler gave him a clear understanding of how trade supported every level of society. He saw that the wealth of the empire did not lie solely in the gold he could gather, but in the network that connected miners, traders, farmers, herders, and scholars. The prosperity that surrounded him came from countless individuals performing their roles with skill and consistency. The miners who sifted gold from riverbeds contributed to a system that allowed scholars in Timbuktu to copy manuscripts. The workers who carved salt slabs supported caravan leaders who later purchased imported goods in Mali's markets. Even the smallest tasks held meaning within this interconnected structure. Beyond the borders of Mali, gold from the empire influenced economies across North Africa and the Mediterranean. Gold circulated widely in Cairo, Tunis, and cities farther east. It shaped the availability of currency, influenced prices, and contributed to the wealth of merchants. Some chroniclers later noted that Mali's gold played a role in stabilizing the monetary systems of Mediterranean cities. Though the full extent of this influence varied from region to region, the importance of Mali's gold in global commerce cannot be overstated. As Musa studied the patterns of trade and wealth, he recognized their potential to support the empire's future. He observed how cities developed along strategic routes, agriculture supported population growth, and how scholarship flourished where economic stability provided time and resources. He envisioned an empire where trade, learning, and religion coexisted, strengthening one another. His investments in education and architecture in later years were not sudden acts of generosity, but deliberate steps grounded in his understanding of the empire's economic foundation. The power of Mali during Musa's time did not rely solely on material wealth. It also rested on reputation. Traders who visited the empire carried stories of its abundance to distant lands. These accounts shaped how Mali was perceived in places such as Egypt and the Middle East. Scholars described the empire as vast and prosperous, and later European mapmakers included references to Mali and its gold fields in their charts. This reputation mattered. It attracted foreign scholars to Mali, encouraged traders to travel through its territories, and strengthened diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms. Musa's appreciation for this interconnectedness guided many of his later decisions. He understood that trade supported education, that education supported governance, and that governance supported trade. Each element sustained the others. This understanding would become especially important when he undertook his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that required tremendous organizational skill and vast resources. Without the steady flow of wealth from salt, gold, and trade, such an undertaking would have been impossible. Though the empire's prosperity seemed secure, Musa recognized that maintaining stability required continuous attention. He monitored the conditions of caravan routes, ensured that agricultural regions had the support they needed during challenging seasons, and promoted officials who acted with fairness. Such efforts strengthened the empire's internal cohesion. Even as Musa prepared for the pilgrimage that would bring him international renown, he never lost sight of the systems that made the empire function. The power of salt, gold, and trade formed the core of Mali's greatness. These elements shaped not only the economy, but the culture, politics, and identity of the empire. Under Musa's leadership, they continued to operate with efficiency and purpose. They sustained the cities, supported the scholars, and connected Mali to distant regions. Through these systems, the empire achieved a level of prosperity that left foreign travelers astonished and contributed to Musa's lasting reputation as the richest ruler in recorded history. By the time Musa had governed the empire for several years, the patterns of daily life within Mali had become well aligned with his measured approach. Trade routes remained secure. Caravans moved with regularity. Farmers worked with predictable cycles along the river, and regional leaders maintained stability in their territories. Within this environment of steady prosperity, Musa turned his attention to a deeper layer of governance, one tied not only to wealth and commerce, but to the ideas, values, and legal frameworks that shaped everyday existence. This layer involved faith, law, and learning. Three forces that had long influenced the empire, but had never before been cultivated with such deliberate unity. Islam had reached West Africa centuries before Musa's birth. It arrived gradually, carried not by conquerors, but by traders from North Africa who crossed the Sahara with their caravans. These traders brought manuscripts, teachings, and customs from cities such as Cairo, Tunis, and Fez. As they spent time in markets and stopping points along their routes, they taught local merchants elements of Islamic practice. Over generations, certain towns in Mali began to incorporate these teachings into their legal and cultural life. Islam grew slowly, interwoven with existing traditions, rather than replacing them. This gradual integration created a unique environment in which faith and custom coexisted. By Musa's time, Islamic scholarship had spread across many of the major cities in the empire. Judges trained in Islamic law presided over disputes in urban centers. Scholars copied manuscripts that detailed legal principles, history, and religious guidance. Teachers instructed students in recitation, interpretation, and arithmetic. Meanwhile, rural communities often retained older beliefs and practices, blending them with elements of Islam according to their local customs. Musa observed these patterns closely. He understood that the empire's unity depended on respecting its cultural diversity, while still encouraging the growth of Islamic learning that connected Mali to a broader, intellectual world. One of Musa's first steps in strengthening scholarship involved supporting the judges who maintained legal order in the cities. These judges held considerable responsibility. They mediated disputes related to trade, marriage, inheritance, lending, and property. Their decisions were based on principles derived from Islamic law, but they also considered the customs of the communities they served. Musa recognized that a stable legal system was essential for trade and social cohesion. To support the judges, he ensured that they received the resources needed to copy legal texts, maintain offices, and oversee hearings. Over time, this support improved consistency in legal rulings across the empire. In addition to supporting judges, Musa encouraged the activity of scholars and teachers. He did not enforce a single school of thought or require uniform instruction. Instead, he offered patronage that allowed scholars to grow their institutions. Naturally, teachers who traveled from North Africa or the Middle East found a welcoming environment in Mali. They brought diverse viewpoints, enriching the intellectual life of the cities. Students benefited from exposure to different interpretations and methods, gaining a broader understanding of religious and legal thought. This environment fostered a culture of learning that complemented the empire's economic success. Musa understood that wealth alone did not create lasting greatness. Knowledge, when cultivated responsibly, strengthened government, improved administration, and encouraged innovation. He saw that learning could shape the empire's future in ways that exceeded the reach of gold or salt. The scholars who taught in cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen contributed to this long-term vision. They trained students who would later become judges, administrators, and teachers themselves. In this way, Musa invested not only in the present, but in generations to come. As Musa supported scholarship, he also strengthened religious practice within the empire. Islam provided a framework for daily habits, community organization, and ethical conduct. Musa participated in religious life regularly, performing prayers and observing Islamic principles. His dedication influenced many within the court, where religious study became more common. Scholars held lessons in designated areas of the palace, teaching both members of the royal family and visiting officials. Musa encouraged this practice, but did not impose it. He respected the personal nature of faith and maintained a balance between encouraging scholarship and preserving the customs that defined local communities. In towns and cities, mosques served as both religious and social centers. They provided spaces for prayer, learning, community gatherings, and legal discussions. Many of these mosques had existed before Musa's reign. Built through the combined efforts of local leaders and merchants, Musa supported their maintenance and improvement. In some cases, he funded expansions to accommodate growing populations. These investments reinforced Mali's connection to the wider Islamic world and strengthened its internal cohesion. Yet Musa refrained from mandating the construction of mosques in regions where communities preferred their traditional forms of worship. His approach remained one of balance and respect. Learning in Musa's time was not limited to religious instruction. Scholars taught mathematics, astronomy, history, and geography. They copied manuscripts from distant places and created new ones that addressed the needs of local students. Some scholars documented trade routes, agricultural knowledge, and regional histories. Others focused on legal commentary or theological analysis. Musa supported all forms of learning, understanding that the empire benefited from knowledge in many fields. He created an environment in which intellectual curiosity could flourish without restriction. The influence of this learning extended beyond the cities. Travelers who passed through urban centers often carried knowledge back to their home regions. They shared teachings with their families and communities, gradually spreading ideas across the empire, though rural communities remained distinct. In their customs, they still benefited from the broader intellectual developments occurring in the cities. This steady exchange of ideas helped maintain unity across Mali's diverse population. Musa's involvement in law and learning also influenced diplomacy. When foreign envoys visited Mali, they encountered a court that valued scholarship and respected the legal process. Scholars who had studied texts from across the Islamic world could engage with visitors in a shared intellectual language. Judges could reference legal principles familiar to scholars in Cairo or Tunis. These similarities strengthened diplomatic relationships and allowed Mali to participate more fully in the cultural and intellectual life of the Middle East and North Africa. One of the key aspects of Musa's approach was his emphasis on organization. He understood that for learning to flourish, it required structure. Manuscripts needed to be stored carefully to protect them from damage. Teachers needed stable environments in which to conduct instruction. Students need places to study. Musa supported the development of libraries, study halls, and administrative offices that helped maintain these systems. Though the most famous of these institutions, Sangra University, would reach its peak after Musa's pilgrimage, the groundwork for such developments began during these years. As Musa expanded support for scholarship, he also recognized the importance of linking faith and law to the daily needs of his people. He encouraged judges to consider local circumstances when applying legal principles. He supported scholars who taught practical subjects alongside religious texts. He valued learning that addressed agricultural improvements, water management, and trade logistics. This balanced approach ensured that the empire's intellectual life remained connected to its economic and social realities. The gradual strengthening of faith, law, and learning had a quiet but profound effect on governance. Officials became more skilled in their roles. Legal disputes were resolved more consistently. Religious institutions provided guidance and stability. Scholars contributed to a culture of reflection that encouraged thoughtful decision-making. These developments enhanced the empire's sense of identity and purpose. During this period, Musa also reflected on the importance of pilgrimage. As a devout Muslim, he viewed the journey to Mecca not only as an obligation, but as an opportunity to strengthen Mali's connection to the wider Islamic world. Yet, he approached the idea with caution. He understood that such a journey required careful preparation. The empire needed to be stable in his absence, and the caravan would require food, water, animals, guides, and security across thousands of kilometers. Musa gradually laid the foundations for this undertaking without disrupting the empire's operations. He strengthened the administrative systems, supported scholars who could guide him in the religious aspects of the pilgrimage, and ensured that trade routes remained safe. His growing interest in pilgrimage reflected a broader vision for the future of Mali. He saw the empire not only as a land of material wealth, but as a center of learning, culture, and religious devotion. He imagined a Mali that participated fully in the intellectual networks of the Islamic world. He envisioned cities with strong institutions, trained scholars, and respected legal traditions. The pilgrimage therefore symbolized both personal devotion and the empire's place in a larger community of knowledge and faith. By reinforcing faith, law, and learning, Musa shaped an environment that would support the ambitious projects he later pursued. These developments gave Mali a sense of coherence and purpose. They strengthened internal unity and enhanced the empire's reputation abroad. They helped create a world in which scholarship, trade, and devotion coexisted seamlessly. This delicate balance formed the foundation of the next chapter in Musa's life, during which he would embark on a journey that transformed the world's understanding of Mali's power and influence. For now, though, Musa remained focused on building stable institutions. His leadership emphasized patience over ambition, understanding over force, and learning over spectacle. The Mali Empire during this phase did not experience dramatic upheavals or sudden shifts. Instead, it grew quietly stronger. The combination of wealth, scholarship, legal order, and religious devotion created an empire that could support ventures of unprecedented scale. In this way, Musa prepared both himself and his realm for the extraordinary journey he would soon undertake. A journey that would bring Mali into the center of global attention and leave a lasting mark on history. A pilgrimage dream takes shape. As Musa's reign continued, the foundations he had strengthened began to support something more ambitious than steady governance. With trade flowing predictably, scholars teaching in growing numbers, judges maintaining order, and the empire's wealth reaching distant markets, Musa found himself able to consider undertakings that required both vision and immense organization. Among these, the idea of performing the pilgrimage to Mecca gradually took shape in his mind, not as a passing thought, but as a long-term plan requiring preparation on a scale few rulers had attempted before. The pilgrimage, or Hajj, held deep religious significance, and for Musa, it carried an added dimension. It would connect Mali firmly to the broader Islamic world. For many Muslims, the pilgrimage involved a long journey on familiar routes leading through North Africa or across the Red Sea. For a ruler in West Africa, however, the journey spanned nearly unimaginable distances. The path from the heart of Mali to Mecca stretched across thousands of kilometers of varying terrain, desert, savanna, river valleys, and bustling towns. The length of the route alone required careful planning, but the scale of Musa's entourage would magnify the logistical demands far beyond the ordinary. Still, he did not approach the pilgrimage with urgency. He moved with his characteristic caution, considering each requirement in detail. His first priority was ensuring that the empire would remain stable during his absence. He had become ruler through an unexpected circumstance, and he understood the vulnerability that could emerge when a leader left the seat of power for another extended period. The empire needed strong administrators, trustworthy officials, and reliable systems in place. Over the years, Musa had cultivated these. He supported judges, promoted capable governors, strengthened trade routes, and ensured that markets ran smoothly. As the empire became more confident under his leadership, Musa gradually recognized that the time was approaching when such a journey could be taken without endangering the integrity of the state. Another essential factor involved resources. A pilgrimage of ordinary scale required food, water, animals, tents, and clothing for travelers. A pilgrimage of Musa's envisioned size would require significantly more supplies for tens of thousands of people: animals to carry loads and draw carts, craftsmen to repair equipment, cooks to prepare meals, and guards to maintain order along every step of the route. These considerations reflected Musa's style of governance. He understood that ambition had to be matched with planning. Mali's wealth made such planning possible, but raw resources alone did not guarantee success. They needed to be organized into a system capable of sustaining a caravan for the entirety of the journey. The thought of traveling with thousands of people did not arise from a desire to impress, but from the practical realities of leadership. Musa intended to perform the pilgrimage as a ruler, not merely as an individual pilgrim. This meant traveling with religious scholars, legal officials, administrators, guards, attendants, and servants who would support him in both spiritual and administrative matters. The size of the entourage reflected the size of the empire. It also ensured that Musa could maintain some degree of governance while traveling, since important decisions often could not wait until he returned. Musa's preparations began with quiet discussions among advisors and scholars. He asked about the routes through the Sahara, the locations of wells, the customs of the towns, the caravan would pass through, and the distances between resting points. Caravans had traveled these routes for centuries, but the knowledge of long-distance travel was typically practical rather than recorded. Musa sought to transform this practical knowledge into a detailed plan. He reviewed accounts from merchants who had crossed the desert, requested guidance from experienced caravan leaders, and gathered information about the regions beyond the desert, places where the caravan would need to secure lodging, food, and safe passage. The next stage of preparation involved assembling the necessary people. The empire drew from its population of farmers, herders, craftsmen, cooks, metal workers, scribes, and laborers. Each person would play a role. Musa envisioned a caravan that carried everything needed for the journey: tents, cooking equipment, water containers, tools, ropes, spare clothing, and supplies for maintaining animals and carts. He understood that failing to prepare for even small contingencies could lead to difficulties that would grow with distance. Thus, he approached preparation with the same thoroughness he applied to governance. An important part of the caravan consisted of religious scholars and leaders. Musa intended the pilgrimage to reflect not only Mali's prosperity, but also its devotion. These scholars would guide the caravan through prayers, recitations, and rituals associated with the pilgrimage. They would also help Musa engage with scholars in other lands. Musa recognized that scholarship connected people across vast distances, and he valued the opportunity to learn from and contribute to the intellectual currents of the Islamic world. Musa also prepared gifts for the journey. In many Muslim lands, it was customary for travelers, especially rulers, to offer gifts to the poor and to the communities they visited. Musa intended to do so in abundance. Gold, textiles, and other valuable goods were designated for distribution along the route. These gifts served multiple purposes. They expressed generosity, strengthened diplomatic relationships, and demonstrated the prosperity of the Mali Empire. Gold, in particular, became central to Musa's plan. The empire's wealth allowed him to carry large quantities of it, and he intended to use it in ways that supported charitable and diplomatic goals. The scale of gold involved was extraordinary. Musa gathered so much gold for the pilgrimage that later chroniclers struggled to describe it. The caravan included camels that carried gold dust, bars, nuggets, and objects made from the precious metal. Some modern estimates placed the amount of gold at around 50 tons, an amount that far exceeded the total reserves of many European kingdoms during the same era. Musa did not set out to disrupt economies, but the sheer magnitude of gold he transported would later have effects that reached far beyond his intentions. In addition to gold, the caravan carried textiles made from fine materials. Foreign cloth, often silk from Persia, was valued both for its beauty and its durability. Musa intended these textiles to serve as garments for members of the caravan and as gifts for people they met. The caravan also included animals richly decorated with fabrics and ornaments. Horses and camels bore equipment made with care and attention to detail. Musa understood that, as a ruler representing a wealthy empire, the appearance of his caravan would shape how people perceived Mali. The time the preparations were nearing completion, the caravan featured not only scholars, administrators, and attendants, but a large group of slaves who would help manage tasks such as carrying supplies, serving meals, and assisting with daily needs. Accounts from the era mentioned that Musa traveled with about 12,000 slaves. Each of them wore garments adorned with gold ornaments. Their presence reflected the social structure of the time, as well as the economic framework of the empire. Musa also ensured that cooks, herders, and craftsmen formed part of the caravan. The cooks prepared meals in camps established along the route. Herders managed livestock, including animals brought for food. Craftsmen repaired equipment, mended clothing, and built temporary structures. Their contributions allowed the caravan to function smoothly. Musa understood that the success of the pilgrimage depended on the coordinated efforts of thousands of individuals performing their tasks with reliability and skill. One feature of the caravan became particularly well known in later accounts: the camels that carried gold dust. Chronicles describe about 80 camels, each carrying over 100 kilograms of gold dust in bags or containers. This gold was intended for distribution to the poor and for purchasing goods along the way. The presence of these camels became one of the most striking symbols of the pilgrimage. They represented the wealth of the empire, the generosity of the ruler, and the scale of the journey. With preparations well underway, Musa turned his attention to the routes themselves. He studied the path across the Sahara, identifying wells and stopping points. He ensured that the caravan carried enough water for the longest stretches of the desert. He reviewed information about the lands beyond the desert, noting locations of towns, markets, and potential dangers. He prepared for both the expected challenges, such as heat and distance, and the unexpected ones that might arise. Musa wanted the pilgrimage to proceed without disruption, and preparation was his primary tool for achieving that. As the caravan grew, word spread across the empire. People in distant regions learned that their ruler was preparing to undertake the pilgrimage. For many, this news carried deep significance. It demonstrated the ruler's commitment to religious duties, affirmed his connection to the broader Islamic world, and reflected the unity of the empire. The pilgrimage also provided a sense of pride. The scale of the journey showed that Mali had achieved a degree of stability and prosperity that allowed such an undertaking without jeopardizing the empire's safety. Before the departure, Musa appointed officials to oversee the empire in his absence. These officials were trusted individuals with experience in administration and diplomacy. They would maintain order, collect taxes, monitor trade, and handle disputes. Musa understood that no empire, however prosperous, could function effectively if leadership structures weakened. Thus, he ensured that every region had clear lines of authority before he embarked on the pilgrimage. As the time of departure approached, the caravan took shape in the open spaces near the capital. Tents, supplies, gold, animals, and people gathered in a vast assembly. The scale of the gathering was unprecedented. People from across the empire brought goods, equipment, and services. Horses stood in lines. Camels knelt beside their loads, and oxmen pulled carts filled with provisions. Scholars recited prayers, craftsmen checked tools, servants organized supplies, and administrators gave instructions. The caravan became a small, moving city that reflected the diversity and strength of the empire. When the final preparations were complete, Musa prepared to lead the caravan out of Mali. He did so, not with haste, but with a sense of calm purpose. The journey ahead would take years. It would cross deserts, rivers, towns, and kingdoms. It would require patience, endurance, and cooperation. Yet, Musa trusted the systems he had built. The empire was stable, his officials were capable, the caravan was prepared. The time had come to begin. With the sun rising behind them, the caravan started its long journey toward Mecca. The departing procession stretched for miles with thousands of people, walking or riding in steady lines. Camels carried loads of gold, livestock moved alongside, and carts creaked under the weight of supplies. The sight of the caravan became a remarkable moment in Mali's history. Though many did not yet understand the full significance of what they witnessed, the journey would soon reveal its extraordinary impact on the regions it touched. In the years to come, this pilgrimage would stand as one of the most famous in world history. It would influence economies, inspire chroniclers, shape diplomatic relationships, and transform cities. But for now, as Musa led his caravan away from the capital, the journey existed only as a promise. The full scale of its consequences lay ahead, waiting quietly along routes that had never before carried such wealth, purpose, and organization. Across the desert with 80 camels of gold, when Musa's caravan moved beyond the settled heartlands of Mali and approached the beginnings of the Sahara, the nature of the journey changed. The world ahead was not shaped by farms, markets, or rivers, but by the long, unbroken landscapes that stretched across one of the largest deserts on Earth. The decision to guide tens of thousands of people across such terrain required not only resources, but a deep understanding of the rhythms and hazards that define desert travel. For centuries, caravans had crossed these sands, carrying salt northward and bringing gold and goods southward. Their knowledge formed the foundation upon which Musa planned the most ambitious caravan West Africa had ever seen. The caravan moved in long columns that wound slowly across open spaces. At its front were experienced guides, men who had memorized the desert's routes through years of patient travel. They knew how to find wells, where to expect shifting dunes, and how to judge wind patterns that could erase tracks within hours. These guides held knowledge that no map could capture, for the desert changed constantly. A well that existed, one year might collapse or fill with sand the next. A stretch of hard earth might soften after seasonal winds. Musa trusted these guides completely, recognizing that the success of the entire pilgrimage depended on their memory and judgment. Behind the guides' camels carrying gold dust. The 80 camels that bore the precious metal became one of the most memorable features of the journey. Each carried heavy sacks filled with gold dust measured carefully by Mali before departure. This gold would serve as both charity and currency. Musa intended to support the poor in every region he passed through and to purchase supplies as needed. The sight of these camels, their loads shimmering faintly in the harsh light, symbolized the empire's wealth and Musa's generosity. Their slow, measured steps formed a steady rhythm that accompanied the caravan across thousands of kilometers. The broader caravan included livestock for food, wagons filled with grain and dried meat, containers of water, bundles, of textiles, and tools for repairs. Craftsmen traveled alongside their equipment, ready to mend leather straps, reinforce wagon wheels, or shape new tent poles. Cooks moved with portable stoves and utensils. Herdsmen guided goats, sheep, and cattle. Musa's entourage also included thousands of servants who carried supplies, erected tents, and tended fires. Scholars walked or rode near Musa, using whatever spare time they had to recite, study, or teach. Soldiers in the caravan maintained order, protected the group, and ensured that no one was left behind. The desert presented challenges that few in the caravan had experienced before. Heat pressed down relentlessly during the day, often rising to temperatures that tested the endurance of even seasoned travelers. Nights could become cold with surprising speed, requiring warm garments and fires for comfort. Sandstorms, though not constant, could arise with little warning. When winds swept across the desert, grains of sand lifted into the air, blurring the horizon and obscuring the path. Caravans learned to halt during these storms, turning their camels and wagons into shields while people sheltered behind them. Musa's caravan, with its massive numbers, had to coordinate these pauses carefully. Progress across the desert followed a patient rhythm. Caravans rarely moved at high speed. Instead, they advanced in sequences punctuated by rests at key wells. These wells marked the essential structure of the route. Without them, the journey would have been impossible. Musa's guides knew the distance between each well and calculated how much water the caravan needed to carry to reach the next. When they arrived at a well, the caravan transformed into a temporary settlement. Animals were watered, water containers were refilled, and fires were lit for cooking. Musa's attendants prepared tents for the night, arranging them in organized rows that created a small but orderly camp. During these breaks, scholars often gathered with set notebooks or loose manuscripts, continuing their studies. Servants repaired sandals, cleaned clothing, or tended to the animals. Gold dust remained secured, guarded by trusted men who understood its importance. Musa himself used these pauses to observe the caravan's condition. He paid attention to the pace of travelers, the behavior of animals, and the morale of the group. His leadership during these moments was quiet but present. He ensured that problems were addressed before they grew larger. Food consumption required careful planning. Grain formed the staple diet for most of the caravan, supplemented by dried meat and whatever fresh livestock could be spared. The cooks prepared meals in large pots, suspended over fires, producing simple dishes that fortified travelers for the journey ahead. Water, however, remained the most carefully monitored resource. Workers filled containers made from animal skins or clay. These containers had to be secured on camels or wagons to prevent spillage. A single miscalculation could weaken part of the caravan, forcing the group to slow down or redistribute supplies. Certain stretches of the desert were known to be more difficult than others. These regions lacked reliable wells and required longer periods of continuous movement. Travelers often walked in silence during these sections, conserving energy. Musa ensured that the caravan prepared thoroughly before attempting such stretches. They filled water containers to maximum capacity, checked the condition of animals, and adjusted loads to minimize strain. Even with such precautions, fatigue inevitably grew. Musa maintained a schedule that allowed for adequate rest while still ensuring progress toward the next well. The presence of thousands of people naturally created logistical challenges. A caravan of this scale could not move as a single unit. Instead, it moved in multiple segments. The first group would depart a resting place, while later groups finished their preparations. This continuous movement prevented bottlenecks and allowed the caravan to spread across wider areas without losing cohesion. Leaders stationed at various points ensured that each segment followed the route correctly. One consequence of the caravan's size was its visibility. Long before arriving in a populated region, travelers and nomadic groups could see dust rising from the desert and hear the faint sounds of movement carried by the wind. For people accustomed to smaller caravans, the sight of Musa's pilgrimage must have appeared astonishing. Some observers likely wondered what kind of empire could send such a large group across the desert. The answer lay in the structures Musa had supported systems that ensured Mali's prosperity and made this journey possible. As they advanced farther north, the caravan encountered regions with more vegetation. Water sources, though still sparse, became more predictable. Certain wells had stone walls built around them by earlier travelers to prevent sand from collapsing into the opening. Musa's caravan often stopped near these wells for extended periods, using the opportunity to redistribute loads or treat animals showing signs of exhaustion. Musa remained attentive to the health of the caravan. He understood that tens of thousands of people depended on careful pacing. Beyond the desert's midpoint, the caravan entered territories influenced heavily by North African trade. Here, towns and small settlements provided additional resources. Local traders offered dates, grains, pottery, and textiles. These items were often purchased with gold, dust. When Musa's servants entered markets to buy goods, they paid generously. This generosity reflected Musa's intention to support local economies along the route. It also reflected a cultural expectation of hospitality and generosity between travelers and hosts. People in these regions quickly recognized that the caravan came from a wealthy empire. Musa's followers wore garments made of fine materials, and many wore gold ornaments. Their appearance contrasted with the simpler clothing typical in desert towns. Chroniclers later recorded that even in the early stages of the journey, Musa's generosity left an impression on communities that encountered his caravan. The closer the caravan moved toward Egypt, the more stories spread. Traders who met the caravan carried accounts of its size and wealth along the routes ahead. Towns strengthened their preparations for the travelers, knowing that Musa's generosity could leave a temporary but significant effect on local markets. By the time the caravan approached the edges of Egyptian territory, word of its wealth had already preceded it. Travel across the desert continued with the same methodical pace that defined Musa's style of governance. The caravan moved steadily, but not hastily. Musa understood that endurance mattered more than speed. By maintaining consistency, he minimized risks and created a rhythm that the entire group could sustain. The experience built a sense of unity among the travelers. Though many came from different backgrounds within the empire, they were miners, herders, scholars, servants, or officials. They shared the challenges of the journey and found familiarity in its routines. Certain nights offered brief moments of calm reflection. Under the vast desert sky, free from clouds, stars shone with a clarity rarely seen elsewhere. Travelers often rested in quiet contemplation or whispered prayers. The presence of scholars provided opportunities for study, even in the midst of the desert, and some travelers listened to recitations when energy allowed. Musa, though carrying the responsibilities of leadership, also found moments to reflect. He viewed the journey not only as a test of physical endurance, but as part of a spiritual process. The pilgrimage was a path toward Mecca, but it also allowed time for introspection and gratitude. As the caravan approached North Africa, the landscape transitioned again. The desert gave way to areas where farming became visible. Towns became more frequent, and the caravan encountered increased trade activity. The travelers adjusted to the change, purchasing goods unavailable in Mali and preparing for the next stages of the journey. Musa continued his pattern of generosity, often distributing gold dust to those in need. These actions created a reputation that spread rapidly. His name carried ahead of him, spoken by merchants, travelers, and officials. Eventually, the caravan reached the vicinity of the Nile. The river, cutting through northeastern Africa, provided water to millions of people and shaped some of the most ancient civilizations on Earth. For travelers from West Africa, the sight of the river represented both relief and transition. The most challenging stretches of the desert lay behind them. Ahead were lands filled with towns, markets, institutions of learning, and centers of political authority. Musa's journey into this region would soon have consequences that reached far beyond his original intentions. Though the desert crossing had demanded endurance and organization, it also demonstrated the strength of the empire Musa governed. Tens of thousands of people had traveled safely across one of the world's most challenging landscapes. Their combined labor supported a caravan that carried not only gold and supplies, but knowledge, devotion, and cultural exchange. This achievement reflected the systems of trade, learning, and leadership developed over generations in Mali. Musa's role in guiding the caravan across the desert marked only the beginning of a journey that would soon become legendary. Cairo and the shock of generosity. When Musa's caravan finally reached the outskirts of Egypt, the transition from desert to river valley unfolded gradually. The land shifted from sparse vegetation to increasingly fertile terrain as the travelers approached the Nile, river whose yearly rhythms shaped life for countless people. After months crossing the Sahara, where every well had been a precious turning point, the sight of abundant water and cultivated fields must have carried a quiet sense of relief to many in the caravan. Herds found grass more easily, cook fires burned with less urgency, and attendants who had endured the harshness of desert winds could now rest more comfortably. It was here, in a region deeply connected to trade and scholarship, that Musa's pilgrimage stepped into the view of a world that would remember it for generations. Cairo, already a thriving urban center, functioned as a major crossroads of commerce, politics, and learning. Caravans from North Africa, Arabia, and the Eastern Mediterranean converged there. Scholars traveled through its streets on their way to study or teach in nearby institutions. Merchants oversaw goods from multiple continents. Mansa Musa's arrival in such a place occurred not in isolation, but as part of these larger patterns. Even so, his presence soon distinguished itself in ways that few could overlook. The caravan, still enormous even after the long journey, approached the city with its characteristic order. Guides at the front, scholars and officials grouped around Musa, attendants managing supplies, guards maintaining structure, and camels carrying their heavy loads of gold. The procession stretched across large distances, and observers soon realized that this was no ordinary pilgrimage group. Reports traveled quickly into the city news of a West African ruler whose wealth appeared unmatched, whose people wore fine garments, and whose animals carried extraordinary quantities of gold. Egypt at that time was under the rule of Sultan al-Malik al-Nasir, whose government oversaw a realm central to the medieval Islamic world. His officials often greeted distinguished visitors, especially those whose travels held diplomatic potential. Musa's arrival attracted immediate attention. Residents of Cairo, accustomed to commerce and foreign travelers, soon spoke of the caravan in marketplaces, workshops, and academic circles. Chroniclers later noted that some people left their homes simply to witness the procession before it entered the heart of the city. As the caravan prepared to halt near the Nile, the group established a camp large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people. For 2 days, people from the rear of the procession continued to arrive, giving the impression of a caravan without end. Observers noted that the pilgrims wore clothing made from Persian silk, a rare and valuable fabric. Many travelers displayed gold ornaments, bracelets, belts, chains, and decorative pieces given to them by Musa. Horses in the caravan wore equipment decorated with gold as well. The entire display reflected the wealth of Mali without needing proclamation or narrative. Before Musa entered the city, Egyptian officials arranged the formalities customary for visiting rulers. However, the initial interactions revealed a tension in expectations. Cairo's diplomatic traditions required guests of state to greet the Sultan in a manner that demonstrated respect. One traditional gesture for distinguished visitors from some regions involved bowing deeply or lowering oneself before the Sultan as a sign of acknowledgement. Musa, understanding both religious teachings and the customs of his own empire, declined to perform gestures that violated his principles. He agreed to meet the Sultan respectfully, but would not kneel or bow in ways that implied submission. The exchange did not escalate into conflict, but it reflected the delicate balance required when different traditions met. Once the formalities were settled, Musa was received in Cairo with hospitality and curiosity. He met officials, discussed matters with scholars, and participated in gatherings where conversations ranged from jurisprudence to commerce. Although the records of these discussions varied in detail, most chroniclers agreed that Musa impressed those who met him with his calm demeanor and thoughtful responses. His presence reflected the sense of stability he cultivated in Mali. Yet, it was not Musa's manner that transformed Cairo's economy. It was his generosity. During his stay, Musa began distributing gold to the poor, purchasing goods in the markets, and offering gifts to officials and scholars. In Islamic tradition, giving charity is considered a noble act, especially during significant journeys. Musa took this obligation seriously. He gave freely without calculating the broader consequences. He viewed charity as a duty of faith and a gesture of goodwill. The scale, however, surpassed anything Cairo had seen. Musa's caravan included vast quantities of gold, and he spent it liberally. Gold dust changed hands in markets with remarkable speed. Traders sold textiles, food, pottery, and other goods to Musa's attendants, who paid well for everything they needed. Gold also entered circulation through direct acts of generosity. Musa gave to scholars, to officials, and to people he encountered. The immediate effect was a flourishing of sales, but the longer-term impact extended far beyond temporary prosperity. Egypt's economy, like many in the medieval world, operated on a relatively stable relationship between supply and value. Gold was precious, partly because it was limited. When large amounts of gold suddenly entered the economy, its value, decreased. Chroniclers later wrote that Musa's generosity resulted in a significant drop in gold's purchasing power in Cairo. Prices rose for goods. Gold became less valuable as currency, and the balance of the market shifted. According to one account, the city required more than a decade, about 12 years, to recover fully from the disruption. Contemporary writers recorded these effects with interest. Some viewed it as evidence of Musa's extraordinary wealth, describing him as a ruler whose spending could reshape a major economic center. Others reflected more practically on the challenge of balancing generosity with economic impact. Musa did not intend to disrupt markets. His actions reflected devotion and goodwill. The consequences, however, revealed the interdependence of medieval economies and the significant influence that a single wealthy ruler could exert across vast distances. During his stay, Musa visited Cairo's institutions of scholarship. Egypt had long been home to scholars studying law, theology, language, astronomy, and mathematics. Musa met teachers and jurists whose knowledge extended across multiple disciplines. These encounters deepened his interest in scholarship and helped shape his plans for Mali's intellectual future. Chroniclers noted that Musa invited several scholars to join him upon his return journey, offering them the opportunity to teach in Mali's growing academic centers. These invitations were not merely diplomatic gestures. They reflected Musa's desire to strengthen education within his empire. The time spent in Cairo also offered Musa a chance to acquire books. Manuscripts in Arabic on topics ranging from religious commentary to scientific observation were available in the markets. Musa purchased many manuscripts during his stay, adding to the intellectual resources he planned to bring home. These texts would later support scholars in Timbuktu and other cities, forming part of the foundation for Mali's later reputation as a center of learning. Amid these intellectual pursuits, the everyday life of the caravan continued. Camps near the Nile bustled with activity. Servants fetched water, cooks prepared meals, and craftsmen repaired equipment. Animals grazed along riverbanks. The river provided a welcome contrast to the desert's harshness, and many travelers used the opportunity to rest before the next stage of the journey. Musa ensured that the entire caravan benefited from the resources available in the region. One particularly striking detail recorded by chroniclers involved the servants who accompanied Musa. Reports describe that thousands of slaves, some accounts say around 6,000, formed a long line from the river to Musa's quarters, passing water in golden-handled buckets. Whether every detail of this image reflected literal practice or a stylized retelling by observers, its presence in historical records demonstrates the impression Musa's caravan made on foreign audiences. For many Egyptians, the combination of wealth, order, and scale represented something extraordinary. As Musa prepared to continue his journey toward Mecca, the people of Cairo continued discussing the impact of his presence. Markets still carried traces of the gold he had spent, and scholars still shared stories of his visits. The arrival of such a wealthy ruler from West Africa reshaped perceptions of Mali. Before Musa's pilgrimage, many in the region had only limited knowledge of the empire beyond its reputation for gold. After his visit, they understood that Mali was not only wealthy, but organized, stable, and connected to global systems of scholarship and religion. When Musa finally departed Cairo, he left behind a changed economy, new intellectual connections, and a wider understanding of Mali's significance. The caravan reorganized its supplies, prepared its animals, and resumed its long journey eastward. Musa led his people with the same calm, steadiness that had carried them across the Sahara. The route ahead would bring them through lands filled with scholars, merchants, and pilgrims from many regions. His generosity, however, had already become a subject of discussion across Egypt, and his name traveled ahead of him once again. Neither Musa nor his entourage could yet know how widely his reputation would spread as a result of the events in Cairo. Chroniclers in faraway lands would later write about his wealth. Mapmakers would depict him holding a golden orb. Historians would consider his pilgrimage one of the most remarkable episodes of the medieval world. For the moment, Musa simply continued toward Mecca, guided by devotion, accompanied by thousands, and supported by the systems he had strengthened in Mali, the Mecca pilgrimage, and gifts to the holy city. When Musa and his vast caravan finally departed from Egypt and continued eastward, the rhythm of the journey changed once again. The hardest stretches of desert lay behind them, and ahead were regions marked by towns, cultivated land, and well-traveled routes. Although the distances remained long, the presence of settlements and markets created an atmosphere different from the deep isolation of the Sahara. The caravan advanced steadily toward the Arabian Peninsula. Guided by scholars who knew the rituals of the pilgrimage and by traders familiar with the roads leading to Mecca, Musa approached this final leg of the journey with a sense of solemn purpose. For him, performing the pilgrimage was not a display of wealth or power, but a fulfillment of religious duty. The journey had already affected people across regions from the Niger River basin to Cairo. Yet, Musa's focus remained on the obligations associated with Mecca. His preparations, though immense, were shaped by a desire to complete the pilgrimage with devotion rather than spectacle. Even so, the scale of the caravan continued to draw attention wherever it traveled. As the caravan moved deeper into lands accustomed to hosting pilgrims, people recognized the distinctive features of the group long before speaking to its members. Observers saw fine textiles, orderly rows of travelers, gold ornaments, and animals carrying supplies. They heard accounts from earlier towns describing Musa's generosity in Egypt and his remarkable wealth. Stories spread even in places Musa had not yet visited. Scholars, merchants, and local officials anticipated his arrival with curiosity. Some wondered how a ruler from so distant a region had managed to sustain such a journey. Others anticipated opportunities to engage in discussions of law, scholarship, or diplomacy. The caravan continued through regions where wells and towns offered predictable stopping points. These locations provided food, water, and shelter, allowing the travelers to rest before resuming their journey. Musa maintained the same structured approach that had guided the caravan across the desert: careful planning, steady pacing, and attention set to the needs of both people and animals. Even in lands with better infrastructure, the challenges of coordinating tens of thousands remained significant. Musa relied on experienced leaders to oversee various parts of the caravan, ensuring that delays or shortages were addressed quickly. Throughout this phase of the journey, Musa's generosity continued. He distributed gold to the poor, offered gifts to scholars, and purchased goods from local markets. His actions reflected long-standing traditions of charity associated with pilgrimage. In Islam, acts of generosity hold particular value, especially when undertaken during significant religious activities. Musa embraced this principle fully. Where earlier rulers might have traveled with smaller offerings, Musa's resources allowed him to give at a scale few had imagined possible. When the caravan finally entered the Arabian Peninsula, Musa reached a region deeply connected to the origins of Islam. The landscape shaped by history, and devotion held significance for pilgrims from across the world. For Musa, traveling through these lands represented both continuity and culmination. He had crossed vast distances, lands with differing climates, languages, and customs to reach this sacred destination. As he entered the vicinity of Mecca, the focus of his attention narrowed. The rituals of the pilgrimage lay ahead, and he prepared to participate in them with the seriousness they required. Mecca, long established as a spiritual and commercial center, welcomed pilgrims year after year. Its markets bustled with activity, and its religious sites drew visitors from regions as distant as Persia, India, East Africa, and Andalusia. Musa arrived not as a conqueror or diplomat, but as a devout Muslim, completing one of the most important acts of worship in Islamic practice. Even so, his arrival did not escape notice. A caravan of such size inevitably drew attention, and chroniclers pointed out that many people came simply to witness the procession. Musa performed the rituals of the pilgrimage with care. He followed the guidance of scholars who traveled with him, ensuring that each step adhered to tradition. The pilgrimage required a series of actions symbolizing devotion, humility, and reflection. Musa approached each ritual without the need for ceremony beyond what was required. Those who observed him later noted that he carried himself with calm dignity, blending into the flow of pilgrims despite the wealth surrounding him. His focus remained on fulfilling the obligations that had motivated the entire journey. After completing the pilgrimage, Musa turned his attention to acts of charity and support for the holy city. He donated large quantities of gold to help maintain and improve Mecca's religious sites. Chroniclers wrote that he offered as much as 20 tons of gold to support restoration efforts, upkeep, and valuable adornments at the Grand Mosque Masjid al-Haram. His contributions helped strengthen existing structures and embellish the sacred spaces. Some accounts mention that the decorative patterns on certain pillars were enhanced with gold supplied by Musa. Whether every detail represents literal fact or reflects the impression of observers, the broader message remains clear. Musa gave generously to support the holiest sites of Islam. Musa also provided resources to assist pilgrims who lacked wealth. He funded food, shelter, and support services for travelers who had come from distant lands. These acts reflected his understanding of the pilgrimage as a shared experience. He viewed himself not only as a ruler, but as one among many pilgrims, each seeking to fulfill a sacred obligation. His contributions strengthened the infrastructure supporting future pilgrims and forged connections between Mali and the broader Muslim world. Beyond Mecca, Musa's generosity extended to Medina, the city that served as the final resting place of the Prophet Muhammad. Many pilgrims visited Medina after completing their rituals in Mecca, and Musa followed this tradition. Chroniclers recorded that he made significant donations here as well, supporting religious institutions and local communities. Through these acts, he deepened Mali's connection to Islamic history and culture. While Musa gave freely, he also observed and learned. The journey exposed him to cities with long-standing traditions of scholarship and architecture. He saw mosques built with refined craftsmanship, libraries filled with manuscripts, and institutions where scholars taught students from across the Islamic world. These experiences shaped his ambitions for Mali. He envisioned cities, especially Timbuktu, becoming centers of learning comparable to those he encountered on his pilgrimage. He recognized that Mali possessed the resources to support such institutions and that its growing population of scholars could guide students in law, theology, mathematics, and literature. During his time in the Arabian Peninsula, Musa encountered scholars whose expertise exceeded what was available in Mali. Some specialized in fields unfamiliar to Musa's own scholars. Recognizing the value of intellectual exchange, Musa invited several of these scholars to return with him to Mali. He provided them with resources and assurances that they would have opportunities to teach and research in his empire. These invitations helped create the academic foundations that later became central to Mali's cultural legacy. One of the most noteworthy individuals associated with Musa's return journey was an architect from Andalusia named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. Chroniclers described him as a skilled designer familiar with architectural styles widely admired in North Africa and Andalusia. Musa asked him to come to Mali and contribute to the development of mosques and public buildings. The collaboration between Musa and al-Sahili would later lead to the construction of some of Mali's most famous structures, including the Mosque of Gingraba and Timbuktu. After completing the pilgrimage and spending time in the holy cities, Musa prepared for the long return journey. The caravan, though still immense, had changed in subtle ways. It now carried additional manuscripts, architectural knowledge, and scholarly connections. Musa's personal understanding of the Islamic world had deepened, and his vision for Mali had expanded. The journey back would take time, crossing many of the same lands they had passed through earlier. But, the meaning of the journey had shifted. It now carried the memory of completed rituals, new relationships with scholars, and commitments to future projects. As the caravan departed Mecca, the travelers organized themselves with the same structure they had maintained throughout the journey. They resumed the steady pace that had allowed them to cross deserts and regions of varied terrain. Musa remained attentive to the needs of the group, ensuring that they had sufficient supplies and that order was maintained. The experience gained during the outward journey made certain aspects of the return more efficient, yet the magnitude of the caravan still required constant coordination. Along the return route, Musa continued his acts of generosity, though often in more measured ways. He provided assistance to communities in need, supported travelers, and engaged with scholars. The economic effects of his spending, however, did not match the impact he had made in Cairo. Many regions along this part of the pilgrimage route had smaller populations and limited economic activity, so his contributions did not produce the same widespread disruptions. As the caravan moved westward, the landscape gradually shifted back toward the familiar territories of North Africa and the Sahara. Musa prepared himself and his people for the long crossing of the desert once again. Though the journey ahead remained challenging, the successful completion of the pilgrimage gave the travelers a sense of purpose, and momentum. Musa, having fulfilled one of the most important obligations of his faith, now turned his thoughts to his homeland and the future projects he hoped to undertake. The pilgrimage had changed his understanding of Mali's place in the world. He recognized that his empire held not only resources but cultural potential. The wealth he commanded could support institutions of learning, architectural development, and broader connections to other centers of scholarship. The pilgrimage had also expanded Mali's reputation. News of Musa's generosity and wealth would continue to spread long after he left the Arabian Peninsula. Scholars in distant lands would write about him, and merchants would recount stories of the pilgrimage in markets across continents. As the caravan moved steadily toward home, Musa carried with him not only a sense of spiritual fulfillment, but a deeper vision for the empire he governed. The return journey marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which Mali's wealth would be used not merely for trade or displays of prosperity, but for transforming cities, supporting scholars, and strengthening foundations that would endure long after his reign. Return through the gold roads of Africa. The journey back from the holy cities unfolded with a sense of transition, as though the caravan carried not only travelers and supplies, but new ideas gathered along the way. The pilgrimage had changed the interior world of Musa and his scholars, and their Conversations quietly exchanged during long stretches of travel now reflected the architectural styles they had seen, the scholarly traditions they had encountered, and the devotional practices that had shaped people from many regions. The caravan's pace remained steady, the routines familiar, but the purpose of the journey had shifted from seeking Mecca to returning home with knowledge and intention. The route back led the caravan once more through regions that had served as crossroads for set pilgrims traveling between Africa, Arabia, and lands farther east. These areas were accustomed to diverse travelers, and yet, even here, Musa's caravan maintained its distinctive character. Tens of thousands of travelers, attendants, servants, scholars, and soldiers created a constant hum of activity. Animals carried supplies, gold, and manuscripts. Craftsmen continued repairing tools and equipment. The travelers' clothing, still made from fine fabrics, stood out in every town they passed. Through news of Musa's generosity in Cairo and his contributions in Mecca had traveled ahead of him, and people often gathered near the roads to glimpse the famous caravan. Although the return journey followed much of the same path, its challenges differed. Supplies had to be replenished, animals needed rest, and certain regions provided fewer resources than before due to the timing of seasonal changes. Musa planned each stage with the same careful attention he had applied during the outward journey. He ensured that water supplies were sufficient, that animals were rotated to reduce exhaustion, and that enough trade goods remained for purchasing necessities in markets along the route. The caravan also carried far more intellectual cargo than it had before. Musa had acquired manuscripts from Cairo, Mecca, and Medina, works on law, theology, mathematics, history, grammar, astronomy, and literature. These manuscripts added weight to the loads, carried by camels, and required careful handling to avoid damage. Scholars traveling with the caravan sometimes discussed the contents of these texts, comparing them to the materials used in Mali's existing schools. Their conversations strengthened Musa's desire to elevate the empire's scholarly institutions and to create centers of learning that mirrored the themes he had encountered on his pilgrimage. One important figure traveling with Musa was the Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. Known for his refined understanding of construction techniques used in Andalusia and North Africa, he had accepted Musa's invitation to join the return journey. During pauses along the route, Musa sometimes spoke privately with him about the structures that could be built in Mali. They considered ways to incorporate new principles into existing architectural styles, adapting designs to local materials, such as mud, brick, and timber. Their early discussions set the stage for the buildings that would later define Timbuktu and other cities within the empire. Many travelers along the route were curious about Musa's future plans. Scholars asked whether he intended to establish new institutions. Merchants wondered how his pilgrimage might influence trade. Travelers not connected to the caravan simply watched with interest as the procession passed by, noting its scale and organization. Musa did not announce his goals publicly, but his quiet manner and the scholars accompanying him made clear that the pilgrimage had broadened his ambitions beyond personal devotion. As the caravan approached Egypt once more, people recalled the earlier impact of Musa's generosity. Cairo, still recovering from the influx of gold that had temporarily lowered the metal's value, greeted the returning caravan with a mixture of admiration and caution. Local chroniclers noted that Musa spent money more carefully on the return journey, distributing gold in smaller amounts and focusing his resources on replenishing supplies rather than making large purchases. The economic effects of his earlier generosity remained a topic of discussion in scholarly circles. Some praised his charity, others reflected on the wide-reaching consequences of introducing such large quantities of gold into a complex economy. Despite these mixed memories, Musa's return through Egypt proceeded smoothly. He had built strong relationships with scholars and officials during his earlier stay, and these connections eased the caravan's progress. He purchased additional manuscripts in Cairo, selecting works that he believed would enrich Mali's growing intellectual community. He also met scholars who had heard of Mali's wealth through stories of the pilgrimage. Some asked questions about the empire's trade routes, its legal systems, and its religious practices. Musa answered thoughtfully, offering a balanced picture of a region shaped by wealth, scholarship, and long-standing traditions. The caravan then prepared to re-enter the Sahara. Travelers understood that this crossing would challenge their endurance once more. Though the outward journey had provided valuable experience, The desert remained unpredictable. Musa ensured that they carried enough water, food, and spare equipment. The transition from the verdant regions near the Nile to the barren expanses of the Sahara was gradual but unmistakable. The familiar patterns of the desert, its winds, dunes, and open horizons returned. The caravan adopted the same patient rhythm it had used before. Travelers walked in long lines, camels carried heavy loads, and guides led the way with the same unerring sense developed over years of experience. Wells remained crucial points of rest, and the caravan paused at each one to refill water containers, prepare meals, and tend animals. Musa continued to monitor the caravan's condition, ensuring that fatigue did not overwhelm travelers during this demanding stage of the journey. Nighttime in the desert offered moments of quiet reflection. Under the open sky, scholars recited passages from new manuscripts or discussed ideas inspired by their experiences in Mecca. Servants rested beside fires and herdsmen kept watch over animals. The desert's silence, interrupted only by occasional gusts of wind or the distant sounds of movement, created an atmosphere that allowed travelers to process the scale of the pilgrimage they had completed. Musa, too, spent time considering the changes he hoped to implement once he returned to Mali. The crossing of the desert lasted many weeks, and when the caravan finally reached the transitional regions between the Sahara and the Sahel, the atmosphere shifted. Vegetation became more common, water sources more reliable, and towns more frequent. The travelers felt the slow relief of returning to familiar landscapes. Markets along the way offered goods from both northern and central Africa, and traders greeted Musa with respect, now fully aware of his achievements and the scale of his pilgrimage. As news spread that Musa was nearing the borders of Mali, communities prepared to welcome their ruler home. Messengers traveled ahead, carrying word of the caravan's approach to towns and villages across the empire. People organized gatherings, prepared food, and decorated squares in anticipation. For many, the return of Musa symbolized stability and continuity. They had entrusted the empire to his leadership during his absence, and his safe return affirmed their confidence in him. Governance. When Musa finally crossed into Mali's territory, the atmosphere shifted from the quiet determination of long-distance travel to the warm familiarity of homecoming. Crowds gathered along the roads to see the caravan. Children watched from shaded spots. Traders displayed goods in hopes of attracting attention, and community leaders welcomed Musa with respectful formality. The caravan, which had endured the challenges of deserts, markets, holy cities, and thousands of miles, moved through lands that felt both familiar and renewed. Musa reached the capital with manuscripts, architectural expertise, strengthened relationships, and a vision shaped by his experiences. His return marked not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a transformative period in Mali's history. The pilgrimage had deepened the empire's connection to the wider Islamic world, expanded Musa's understanding of scholarship and architecture, and provided him with the means to reshape his cities. One of the immediate consequences of the pilgrimage was Musa's strengthened resolve to build institutions that reflected the learning and devotion he had witnessed. Scholars who had accompanied him returned eager to teach. The manuscripts they brought back became sources of study for future generations. The architect al-Sahili began to plan buildings that would become landmarks. These efforts would soon change not only Timbuktu, but the cultural landscape of Mali. The return journey also reinforced the empire's identity. Travelers who had endured the journey shared their experiences with family and neighbors, contributing to a collective memory that celebrated endurance, devotion, and unity. The pilgrimage became part of the empire's narrative, demonstrating Mali's ability not only to accumulate wealth, but to use it in meaningful ways. The gold roads through which Musa traveled, both on the outward and return journeys, represented more than trade routes. They were pathways, connecting cultures, ideas, and aspirations. Musa's pilgrimage made these connections visible. It demonstrated that the empire was part of a larger world, shaped by commerce, scholarship, and faith. His return to Mali brought with it the promise of new institutions, strengthened networks, and innovations that would define the next stages of his reign. What lay ahead was a period of construction, transformation, and expanded influence. The pilgrimage had been a journey of devotion, but it also, became a catalyst for change. Musa returned not only as a ruler, but as a leader, inspired by new understandings of what an empire could build and become. Architects, scholars, and the remaking of Timbuktu When Musa returned to Mali, the immediate celebrations slowly blended back into the familiar rhythm of daily life. Yet beneath this sense of continuity, a transformation was about to unfold. Musa had come home not only with the fulfillment of a great religious duty, but with a vision shaped, set by everything he had witnessed: great mosques of stone, libraries filled with manuscripts, schools where scholars taught students from distant lands, and architectural styles that reflected centuries of refinement. The pilgrimage had expanded his understanding of what a city could be. And now he intended to reshape Mali's urban centers so they could take their place among the respected centers of learning in the Islamic world. Timbuktu, already a growing hub of trade near the Niger River, became central to Musa's plans. Before his pilgrimage, it had served mainly as a meeting place for caravans, a resting point where goods, news, and travelers converged. Its location at the crossroads between the Sahara and the river valley made it valuable. But Musa envisioned something beyond trade. He imagined Timbuktu as a center of scholarship, a place where students could gather from across Africa to study law, theology, mathematics, grammar, astronomy, and literature. With the knowledge he had gained and the experts he brought with him, he now had the means to turn that vision into reality. One of the most influential figures Musa brought from his pilgrimage was the Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. His skills had been shaped in regions known for their beautifully constructed mosques and refined urban architecture. Although Mali's building materials differed from those in North Africa or Andalusia, al-Sahili quickly adapted. He studied local construction practices, examined the properties of mud brick, and observed how builders used timber to reinforce walls against the heat and seasonal rains. He respected Mali's traditions while identifying ways to incorporate new ideas into the local architectural language. Musa's first major commission for al-Sahili was the Gingreba Mosque in Timbuktu. Its design, though shaped by Islamic architectural principles, blended seamlessly with West African building techniques. Workers used mud, straw, and timber to construct thick, walls that protected against heat and retained coolness within. Wooden beams protruded from the walls, not only as structural supports, but as practical footholds for future maintenance. The finished building impressed local communities and travelers alike. It became an architectural landmark that symbolized both the empire's devotion and its growing cultural sophistication. This mosque was only the beginning. Musa encouraged construction throughout Timbuktu and other cities, focusing on buildings that supported religious practice, scholarship, and governance. Study halls were added near mosques, homes were built for scholars, and open areas were organized to accommodate gatherings of students. The structures carried both aesthetic and functional value. They demonstrated the empire's capacity for design while supporting the intellectual and spiritual life of the community. Construction required resources, and Musa provided them readily. Gold funded the acquisition of materials, wages for workers, and the transport of supplies. But these projects also relied on the knowledge and labor of local builders who understood the landscape. Communities participated willingly, recognizing that the new buildings would benefit not only religious life, but also education, trade, and communication. The projects created jobs, stimulated the local economy, and strengthened civic pride. As buildings rose in Timbuktu, Musa turned his attention to the city's intellectual foundations. The manuscripts he had brought from Cairo, Mecca, and Medina needed to be stored carefully. He instructed scholars to organize collections and to create spaces where students could study. The result was the expansion of the institution known as Sangra. Although the Mosque of Senor had existed before Musa's return, his investments transformed it into a flourishing center of learning. Teachers developed curricula based on the manuscripts Musa had acquired. Students began studying in structured programs that covered a range of disciplines. Over time, scholars recorded that Sanka's library contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, some accounts claiming as many as 1 million over the centuries. The growth of Sanka did not occur suddenly. It unfolded gradually as scholars copied texts, taught classes, and expanded their collections. The manuscripts came from many regions: North Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of West Africa. They covered religious law, grammar, arithmetic, astronomy, medicine, logic, poetry, and history. Musa supported copying efforts by funding scribes and providing materials such as ink, paper, and leather for binding. Scholars gained recognition for their expertise, and students traveled from distant lands to study under them. The expansion of education in Timbuktu had broader effects across the empire. Regional leaders began sending promising students to study in the city. These students later returned to their communities as judges, teachers, and administrators. Their knowledge strengthened local governance, improved legal consistency, and deepened the empire's integration into the wider Islamic intellectual world. With each generation of students, the cultural identity of the empire shifted. Scholarship, once concentrated in a few cities, now became part of the empire's broader social fabric. Alongside Timbuktu, the city of Gao benefited from Musa's investments. Located along the Niger River, Gao had long served as a trade center. After the pilgrimage, Musa expanded its religious and educational infrastructure. He ordered the construction of mosques and supported the establishment of study halls. Scholars visited Gao more frequently, and merchants took advantage of the improved facilities. Musa's efforts strengthened Gao's position as both a commercial and cultural center. Nani, the imperial capital, also underwent changes. Although Musa focused his intellectual ambitions on Timbuktu and Gao, he did not neglect the city where political decisions were made. He commissioned the construction of a great audience hall using stone and timber with a domed roof reinforced by beams. The doors and interior designs incorporated gold, reflecting the empire's wealth. Although the exact details of the building's appearance remain unknown, chroniclers consistently described it as an impressive structure that symbolized royal authority. Across the empire, communities participated in building and maintaining mosques. Musa provided resources, but local craftsmanship and initiative ensured that the structures reflected the character of their regions. Many mosques built during his reign followed traditional West African styles using mud, brick, and wood, while incorporating decorative features influenced by Islamic architecture. The result was a unique architectural landscape that blended external influence with local identity. These architectural achievements complemented Musa's educational reforms. The combination of buildings and scholarship created environments where knowledge could grow. Students learned not only from texts, but also from each other and from visiting scholars attracted by the empire's intellectual reputation. Over time, Mali became known as a land where learning flourished alongside trade. Chroniclers traveling through the region wrote about its libraries, teachers, and scholarly gatherings. The reputation of Timbuktu as a center of knowledge began during Musa's reign and continued for centuries. The transformation did not occur without challenges. The expansion of institutions required careful management, including the appointment of trustworthy officials who could oversee resources and ensure fairness in educational access. Musa worked closely with his administrators, selecting individuals who demonstrated integrity and skill. He recognized that the sustainability of his projects depended on responsible governance. Another aspect of the transformation involved diplomacy. As news spread of Mali's architectural and scholarly developments, leaders from neighboring regions and distant kingdoms became more interested in forming relationships with the empire. Embassies traveled to Mali. Merchants expanded their routes and scholars sought opportunities to teach or study within the empire. These exchanges strengthened Mali's influence across West Africa and the broader Islamic world. The remaking of Timbuktu extended beyond buildings and manuscripts. It created a cultural atmosphere in which learning became part of everyday life. Markets bustled with traders, but also with scribes selling copies of manuscripts and artisans crafting tools used in teaching. Families encouraged children to study, and elders respected the role of scholars in community decision-making. The city became a place where trade and knowledge reinforced each other. Musa continued to support these developments throughout his reign. His vision for Mali centered on the idea that wealth should enrich not only the royal court, but the cultural and intellectual life of the people. The buildings he commissioned, the scholars he funded, and the students he encouraged all reflected this commitment. His investments created lasting foundations that endured well beyond his lifetime. By integrating architecture, scholarship, and governance, Musa helped shape an empire that held its place in history, not only for its wealth, but for its contributions to learning and culture. Timbuktu emerged as a symbol of this legacy. A city where manuscripts filled shelves, scholars debated ideas, and students gathered in courtyards to learn. Gao grew into an administrative and religious center. Nani flourished as the political heart of the empire. Across Mali, The landscape changed as communities built mosques and schools inspired by Musa's example. The remaking of Timbuktu and the spread of scholarship represented more than cultural achievements. They demonstrated how an empire could use wealth to build enduring structures and institutions that benefited its people. Musa's decisions during this period reflected a deeper understanding acquired during his pilgrimage that knowledge supported by strong foundations could strengthen an empire as effectively as gold. These developments marked a new phase in Mali's history. The empire now attracted scholars, architects, merchants, and diplomats from across regions. Its cities grew in complexity and influence. Its reputation spread beyond trade to include learning, architecture, and governance. Musa had returned from the pilgrimage with a vision, and through patient leadership, he brought that vision to life. An empire of scholars, traders, and builders. The years following Musa's great architectural and scholarly projects marked a period when the Mali Empire reached a level of cohesion and influence few regions of the medieval world could match. What emerged during this era was not simply a wealthy kingdom, but a remarkably interconnected society in which trade, learning, administration, and craftsmanship supported one another with steady reliability. Musa's efforts had set changes into motion that spread far beyond the cities where construction began. Villages adapted, trade routes expanded, scholars traveled more frequently, and people across the empire began to experience the effects of a government investing in long-term prosperity rather than temporary glory. Trade, always central to Mali's success, became even more organized. Caravans crossing the Sahara now found improved resting points along routes, thanks to modest infrastructure projects encouraged by Musa's administrators. Wells were reinforced, roadside shelters were maintained more deliberately, and certain markets expanded to accommodate the increased movement of goods and people. Salt caravans remained essential, carrying their heavy slabs from desert mines into regions where salt was valued almost as highly as gold. These caravans, often led by experienced families of desert guides, now traveled with greater confidence, knowing that their routes passed through lands governed by leaders who viewed trade as the empire's lifeblood. In return, gold continued to flow outward from Mali's southern regions. The methods of extraction remained simple, scraping, panning, and washing river sediments, but their cumulative results remained extraordinary. Generations of miners worked in families or small groups, and their harvest of gold dust contributed steadily to the empire's wealth. Musa never attempted to monopolize the gold fields. Instead, he supported fair systems of taxation and ensured that trade remained safe. This encouraged miners and merchants alike, fostering economic stability. The steady flow of gold sustained the empire internally and strengthened its reputation abroad. As trade expanded, cities across Mali experienced new growth. Timbuktu's markets grew crowded, not only with merchants from Niger, Sahel, and the Sahara, but with scholars and scribes drawn to the city's rising academic reputation. Many traders now traveled with small collections of manuscripts, recognizing that books had become valuable commodities within Timbuktu's scholarly climate. The exchange of manuscripts, ideas, and languages enriched the city's intellectual culture. Scholars who had studied under teachers brought from Cairo or Andalusia continued developing local traditions of commentary and teaching, blending external influences with West African perspectives. Gao further east emerged as a complementary center of activity, its strong connections to regions around the Nisa River made it an ideal location for distributing goods and hosting administrative offices. Musa's investments in mosques and schools strengthened its cultural significance, and its markets attracted caravans traveling to and from forested regions in the south. The combination of trade and scholarship reinforced Gao's identity as one of the empire's essential cities. Nani, the capital, continued to serve as the political heart of the empire. Here, Musa's audience hall, built with stone and gold-adorned details, symbolized both the wealth and the stability of Mali. Inside this building, Musa met with administrators, judges, ambassadors, and community leaders. Though many chroniclers later emphasized the architectural splendor of this hall, its importance lay largely in the daily work. It supported record-keeping, legal deliberation, discussions of trade policy, and coordination among regional leaders. Musa's administrative style brought order to the proceedings, ensuring that decisions aligned with the empire's long-term goals. Another feature of the empire during this period was its communication system. While messages still traveled by foot, horse, or river, Musa improved coordination by establishing clearer expectations for how reports should be compiled and delivered. Regional governors submitted information about taxes, disputes, and trade movements. Judges reported on legal developments. Caravan leaders informed the capital of safe routes or potential hazards. These streams of information allowed Musa to maintain oversight across vast distances. Although the system lacked the speed of later communication technologies, it functioned effectively in its context and contributed to the empire's stability. Education also expanded beyond the principal cities. Inspired by developments in Timbuktu and Gao, regional leaders supported local teachers who offered instruction in reading, arithmetic, recitation, and religious practice. These teachers sometimes received manuscripts copied in Timbuktu, allowing them to share knowledge more widely. Young people from rural areas traveled to cities to study and returned to their communities as teachers or judges. This slow but steady spread of literacy and learning strengthened the empire's administrative capabilities, making it easier to manage distant regions through trained officials. The influence of Islamic practice continued to grow during Musa's reign. Mosques, some modest and others elaborate, appeared in many communities. Friday prayers drew large gatherings, and religious festivals became moments of social unity. Yet, even as Islam expanded, traditional customs remained present in everyday life. Musa encouraged coexistence, recognizing that the stability of the empire depended on respecting diverse cultural practices. Villages maintained local traditions in ceremonies, agriculture, and communal decision-making, while cities developed legal structures based on Islamic principles. This balance made the empire both cohesive and adaptable. Diplomacy became increasingly important as Mali's reputation spread. Embassies from North Africa and other regions sought audiences with Musa. Some ambassadors brought gifts, such as textiles, books, or crafted items. Others sought gold or trade agreements. Musa approached diplomacy with steady composure. He recognized that Mali's influence depended not only on wealth, but on relationships built through fairness and mutual respect. He negotiated access to trade routes, discussed legal matters with foreign scholars, and encouraged the exchange of knowledge. These diplomatic interactions improved Mali's standing across the Islamic world. Architectural projects continued throughout this period as well. Musa instructed al-Sahili to design additional structures that combined West African materials with architectural knowledge from Andalusia. These included smaller mosques, public offices, and residential buildings for scholars. Local builders, observing the new styles, adapted elements into their own work. Within a generation, a recognizable architectural aesthetic developed across several cities characterized by thick walls, wooden supports, stucco finishes, and carefully proportioned courtyards suited to the climate. This style, though influenced by external knowledge, remained distinctly West African, showing how cultures could blend without losing their identity. Craftsmanship in the empire also flourished. Metal. Workers produced jewelry, tools, and decorative pieces. Potters made vessels for storage, cooking, and rituals. Leather workers crafted sandals, bags, and writing cases for scholars. Scribes copied manuscripts by hand, each page reflecting long hours of careful labor. These crafts not only served practical needs, but also contributed to the cultural richness of Mali. The demand for skilled artisans grew, especially in cities where scholars required writing materials and where mosques required regular maintenance. The economic system supporting these developments remained robust. Taxes collected on trade-funded construction projects, salaries for officials, and support for scholars. Taxes collected from agricultural regions ensured food supplies for cities and for the royal court. The empire's administrative network monitored these flows, adjusting taxation based on harvests or market changes. Musa's approach emphasized predictability and fairness, which helped maintain trust among regional leaders and merchants. At the same time, the empire maintained military strength. Although Mali was not engaged in constant warfare, it needed a reliable force to protect trade routes, deter raids, and maintain order. Musa ensured that soldiers were well equipped and stationed strategically. Their presence reassured merchants and strengthened the empire's borders. However, Musa did not expand the empire aggressively. His focus remained on internal development, economic stability, and diplomatic relationships. Travelers visiting Mali during this time wrote accounts that emphasized both its wealth and its cultural sophistication. They described lively markets, large mosques, educated scholars, and communities that valued learning. Some noted the abundance of gold in everyday transactions. Others highlighted the comfortable living conditions supported by agriculture and trade. These descriptions, carried back to regions such as North Africa and the Middle East, strengthened Mali's reputation as one of the most prosperous regions of the medieval world. The growth of Timbuktu's scholarly environment in particular attracted attention. As more manuscripts were copied and more students enrolled in courses, the city gained recognition as a place where knowledge flourished. Scholars from distant lands visited to lecture or debate. Students stayed for many years, mastering subjects that prepared them for roles in government, law, or education. Musa's investments had turned the city into a center of learning whose influence extended across centuries. Meanwhile, trade continued to link Mali to distant markets. Gold traveled north, salt traveled south, and merchants moved between cities carrying textiles, horses, copper, spices, and pottery. These exchanges kept the empire economically strong and culturally vibrant. Movements along trade routes also allowed stories of Musa's pilgrimage to continue circulating even decades after the journey. Merchants still recounted tales of the gold he had given away in Cairo and the architectural skill he had brought home. In this period of flourishing development, the Mali Empire reached a level of stability that would define the remainder of Musa's reign. Cities grew more sophisticated, scholarship expanded, architecture developed in new directions, and trade networks strengthened. Communities across the empire experienced the benefits of Musa's policies, some through education, others through trade, and others through improved infrastructure. The empire had evolved into a realm where wealth did not remain confined to the royal court, but circulated through buildings, manuscripts, legal systems, and thriving markets. The transformation reflected Musa's understanding that prosperity gained meaning only when it supported people's lives and created enduring institutions. The Mali he governed now stood not only as a major economic power, but as a cultural force recognized far beyond its borders. The stage was now set for the next era of his leadership, one in which Mali's influence would reach even further, and in which the foundations he built would be tested by forces, both internal and external diplomacy, trade networks, and the wider world. As the Mali Empire matured under Musa's guidance, its relationships with neighboring kingdoms and distant regions grew increasingly important. What had once been a relatively contained network of trade routes now extended across deserts, river valleys, and coastal regions, linking Mali to lands far beyond West Africa. Diplomacy, trade, scholarship, and religious connection all played roles in defining Mali's place in the medieval world. By this stage in Musa's reign, the empire no longer appeared on maps solely because of its gold. It was now recognized for its administration, its learning, and its growing influence in global affairs. The Sahara, often described as a barrier between West Africa and the Mediterranean world, functioned more accurately as a vast network of shifting corridors. Caravans crossed it regularly, guided by families who passed down knowledge of oases, winds, and safe paths. These caravans carried gold northward, but they also brought back copper, horses, textiles, and books. Under Musa's leadership, the empire ensured that these routes remained safe. Soldiers protected critical points, administrators collected taxes fairly, and local communities benefited from the movement of merchants. As a result, the study found that the relationship between the two variables was not significant. Caravan networks flourished, and Mali's economic influence spread widely across the region. North African merchants played a particularly important role. Many came from cities such as Fez, Tunis, and Cairo. Drawn by Mali's reputation for gold and its stable governance, they brought with them goods produced in urban centers, fine fabrics, metalware, writing materials, and perfume. Some also carried manuscripts copied by scholars in their home cities. These visitors often remained in Mali for extended periods, participating in local markets, teaching or working as scribes. Mali's welcoming attitude toward foreign merchants helped integrate the empire more deeply into the commercial and intellectual world of the time. Diplomatic relationships developed naturally from these exchanges. When officials from North Africa or other Islamic regions visited Mali, Musa and his court received them with thoughtful formality. Discussions typically focused on trade agreements, legal matters, or Religious questions. Mali's stability impressed visiting envoys, who often reported that the empire's wealth was matched by its administrative order. These impressions later influenced how mapmakers and historians depicted Mali in their works. One of the most significant diplomatic legacies of Musa's reign emerged through the creation of world maps in the Mediterranean region. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, considered one of the most important medieval maps, famously depicted Musa seated on a throne set, holding a golden orb and a scepter. Even though the map was created decades after his pilgrimage, Musa's reputation endured long enough for cartographers to include him prominently. The painting showed him as a symbol of immeasurable wealth, but it also reflected Mali's growing recognition as a major presence in global trade. Diplomacy also extended southward and westward. The forest regions beyond the Niger River provided trade goods such as kola nuts, ivory, and agricultural products. Musa ensured that relationships with these regions remained stable. He respected their local governance and customs, focusing primarily on maintaining peaceful trade networks. Over time, these relationships strengthened economic ties and contributed to the empire's steady supply of goods that could not be produced in the drier northern regions. To the east, Musa's acquisition of the territory of Gao during his return from Mecca expanded Mali's influence. Although the full integration of Gao into the empire required careful management, the initial stages progressed smoothly. Musa appointed trustworthy officials to oversee the region and ensure that local leaders retained a meaningful role in administration. This balanced approach reduced resistance and allowed Gao to develop as a cultural and economic center aligned with Mali's broader goals. Musa's diplomatic reach also extended into the Islamic scholarly world. The scholars who traveled with him from Mecca or Cairo often served as informal diplomatic channels. Their letters, manuscripts, and recommendations strengthened intellectual ties between Mali and academic centers across North Africa and the Middle East. Over time, Timbuktu's reputation as a scholarly center made it a destination for scholars seeking new opportunities or wishing to teach in a respected institution. These migrations created a flow of knowledge into Mali that complemented its material prosperity. The empire's internal systems supported these external relationships. Musa encouraged officials to maintain accurate records of trade movements, tax collections, and market activities. These records helped the government respond to fluctuations in trade or shortages in certain goods. Administrators working in river regions monitored agricultural output and ensured that food supplies remained stable. This internal organization impressed foreign visitors, who often remarked on how efficiently the empire balanced its economic and administrative functions. Agriculture, though overshadowed in many accounts by gold, formed a crucial foundation of Mali's stability. Along the Niger River, communities cultivated rice, millet, sorghum, and vegetables. Musa supported the construction of irrigation systems in certain regions. These improvements increased yields and made it easier for cities to support growing populations. In rural areas, communities maintained centuries-old agricultural rhythms, adjusting slightly as new administrative practices encouraged better coordination. The steady supply of food ensured that urban centers, including students and scholars in Timbuktu, had reliable resources to support their work. Musa's leadership also emphasized fairness in legal matters. Judges trained in Islamic jurisprudence applied laws consistently across the empire, helping resolve disputes and maintain order. Many of these judges studied in Timbuktu or Gao, benefiting from the manuscripts Musa brought back from his pilgrimage. Their presence strengthened the empire's cohesion, making it easier to manage regions with diverse cultures and traditions. The balance between Islamic law and local customs remained central to maintaining social stability. One area of diplomacy that required particular care involved the empire's military. Although Mali did not pursue aggressive expansion during most of Musa's reign, it needed a reliable force to ensure the safety of trade routes and to deter potential conflicts. Musa equipped his soldiers with necessary supplies and maintained training programs that supported readiness without causing undue burden on local communities. This measured approach allowed the military to function effectively without overshadowing the peaceful aspects of the empire's development. The empire's growing reputation attracted a variety of travelers, merchants, scholars, artisans, and even explorers who wished to understand the source of Mali's wealth. Some travelers served as chroniclers recording set their impressions in works that circulated across the Islamic world. These writings contributed to the legend of Musa's wealth, describing markets where gold dust served as a common medium of exchange and cities filled with architectural innovations. Although some accounts contained embellishments, they reflected genuine admiration for the empire's achievements. As diplomatic and trade networks expanded, so did Mali's connections to the Moroccan port cities along the Atlantic. These ports linked African trade routes to Mediterranean markets and even to European merchants seeking access to West African goods. Although Musa did not pursue maritime trade directly, the increasing movement of goods through these ports indirectly positioned Mali as one of the most influential economic forces in the region. European interest in West African gold grew significantly during this time. Even though direct contact with Mali remained limited, the growing influence of Mali transformed the social fabric of the empire. Families involved in trade became more settled, investing in property or education for their children. Scholars gained recognition and could travel with greater ease. Craftsmen benefited from increased demand for manuscripts, tools, and architectural materials. Administrators from smaller communities had opportunities to join the government. These developments reflected an empire that encouraged mobility and learning rather than rigid hierarchy. Through all these changes, Musa remained steady in his leadership. He balanced tradition with innovation, wealth with responsibility, and diplomacy with stability. His awareness of the broader world, strengthened by his pilgrimage, allowed him to guide Mali with a clear understanding of its potential and its role within global networks. By fostering relationships across regions, he ensured that Mali remained connected, respected, and prosperous. The empire's wealth no longer stood alone as its defining feature. Now, its learning, governance, architecture, and diplomatic relationships shaped its identity. Musa's influence reached far beyond the borders of Mali, weaving the empire into a wide tapestry of cultures and exchanges. These connections would support Mali's stature in the decades following his reign and would form the basis for how future historians understood the empire's significance. By the time Musa's reforms, buildings, schools, and diplomatic networks had taken firm root across the Mali empire, a new phase of his reign began to unfold, one shaped as much by perception as by policy. The world beyond Mali increasingly regarded Musa not only as a sovereign, but as a symbol of extraordinary wealth, stability, and learning. Stories about his pilgrimage circulated widely, often reshaped by retellings. Traders embellished details to impress their customers. Scholars added context to illustrate the power of Islamic devotion, and mapmakers used his image to represent the riches of an entire region. The blending of fact and legend created an aura around Musa unlike anything associated with other rulers of his time. Yet within Mali itself, the empire's prosperity rested not on legends, but on the steady rhythm of work performed by countless miners, farmers, scribes, builders, merchants, and administrators. Musa understood that stability required a well-coordinated foundation. He continued to oversee systems that kept trade routes secure, cities productive, and learning accessible. Meanwhile, the empire's growing reputation created new opportunities and new challenges that demanded his attention. This was the Gilded Age of Musa's rule, where Mali's internal strength met the expanding imagination of the outside world. The legends began in many ways with the sheer scale of Musa's pilgrimage, the numbers associated with it. Tens of thousands of people, dozens of camels laden with gold, servants dressed in silk captured imaginations across continents. In Cairo, where economists and scholars recorded the long-lasting effects of Musa's generosity, the story took on a life of its own. Merchants passing through the city carried these tales farther east to Medina, Damascus, and Baghdad, and westward into North Africa and Andalusia. Even before Musa returned home, people far from Mali spoke of a king whose wealth could sway an entire economy. One account in particular spread widely: the notion that his distribution of gold in Cairo had depressed its value, for more than a decade. Whether the exact duration of this effect was 12 years as some chroniclers claimed or somewhat shorter according to other estimates, the idea itself symbolized the immense scale of Musa's wealth. Chroniclers repeated the story as evidence of how the actions of one ruler could influence markets across regions. Over time, the narrative became less about the precise economic impact and more about the impression it left Musa as the wealthiest figure of his age. Back home in Mali, life continued in a more measured way. The empire's prosperity came from steady production rather than sudden extravagance. Goldfields remained productive. Salt caravans continued their long journeys and agriculture flourished along the Niger River. Musa ensured that wealth circulated through construction, scholarship, and governance. Communities across the empire felt the benefits of these investments, even if they never heard the exaggerated tales spreading abroad. One area where Musa's influence grew steadily was legal administration. Judges trained under scholars in Timbuktu began applying Islamic jurisprudence with increasing confidence. Their rulings shaped local customs and provided structure across regions with diverse traditions. Musa encouraged consistent application of the law while still allowing communities to observe their long-standing practices in matters not governed by religious principles. This careful balance strengthened trust in both local leaders and the central government. As the empire matured, Musa also refined the tax system. Trade taxes remained key, but agricultural levies were adjusted to reflect harvest conditions. Administrators carefully recorded the quantity of goods coming into and out of major markets. This information helped the court anticipate shortages or surpluses and plan accordingly. The system operated with a level of coordination that impressed foreign visitors. Some envoys recorded that Mali's administration rivaled that of established states in North Africa and the Middle East, a remarkable comparison for a West African empire at that time. The cultural atmosphere of the empire reflected its stability. In cities, scholars held classes in mosque courtyards or study halls. Students copied manuscripts and scribes used imported inks and paper to produce texts. Markets offered goods from across Africa and beyond, cloth from the north, beads from coastal regions, iron tools crafted by local blacksmiths, manuscripts carried by traders from Morocco or Egypt. In rural areas, communities organized harvest festivals, practiced local crafts, and maintained traditions passed down through generations. Islamic education spread gradually, blending with local customs rather than replacing them outright. This blending of tradition and scholarship contributed to Mali's cultural identity. Musa supported learning not as a replacement for existing practices, but as a foundation that could enrich life across the empire. Scholars taught students in ways that respected regional norms, and judges incorporated local customs when appropriate. The result was a coherent legal and cultural environment that strengthened social cohesion while preserving diversity. The stories circulating abroad often emphasized Musa's gold, but within Mali, his reputation rested equally on how he used wealth. The construction of mosques, schools, bridges, and administrative buildings demonstrated his commitment to improving daily life in the empire. Communities that received support for local projects viewed Musa as a benefactor, not merely a distant ruler. His investments created spaces for teaching, worship, and trade, each reinforcing the others. The empire's growing prominence also attracted new waves of travelers. Scholars sought opportunities in Timbuktu's growing institutions. Merchants visited markets in Jenny and Gao, and envoys traveled to Niani for diplomatic discussions. These interactions strengthened Mali's connections to a wider world and contributed to the empire's understanding of global affairs. Mali no longer appeared as a distant land defined solely by gold. It now stood as an active participant in intellectual, diplomatic, and economic exchanges across regions. Among the most influential visitors were North African scholars who spent months or years teaching in Timbuktu. Their presence enhanced the curriculum at Sankor and helped shape future generations of students. Some introduced new commentaries on Islamic law. Others taught astronomy or mathematics. Their manuscripts enriched the city's growing libraries, and their teaching methods influenced local scholars who later trained students of their own. The gradual accumulation of knowledge transformed Timbuktu into a respected center of learning whose reputation extended far beyond West Africa. These developments contributed to the increasing complexity of Mali's urban life. Timbuktu's neighborhoods became organized around scholarly communities, markets, and religious institutions. Students gathered in courtyards for discussions that continued late into the evening. Traders filled the markets with goods from Europe, North Africa, and regions south of the empire. Scribes sold copies of manuscripts, and craftsmen produced tools for scholars, merchants, and travelers alike. The city's growth created opportunities for artisans, builders, and families seeking work or education. While Timbuktu rose in prominence, other cities maintained their importance. Gao remained central for trade along the Niger River, Jeni served as a key agricultural and commercial hub, and Nani preserved its role as the administrative heart of the empire. Each city developed in ways suited to its location and function. Musa recognized that a strong empire required multiple centers of activity, not a single dominant city. This distributed structure allowed Mali to respond flexibly to changes in trade, weather, or political conditions. The spreading legends about Musa's wealth and generosity had unexpected effects on diplomacy. Some regions viewed Mali as a potential partner, capable of influencing markets or providing resources for significant projects. Others admired Musa's architectural achievements and sought similar developments for their own cities. Envoys visiting Mali often requested guidance on construction techniques or educational practices. Musa responded thoughtfully, recognizing that cooperation strengthened relationships without compromising Mali's interests. One dimension of his leadership that often went unnoticed by foreign chroniclers was his attention to succession and governance. Musa trained his son, Magan, and other potential heirs in administrative duties. He introduced them to judges, scholars, and governors across the empire. Although Magan would later struggle to maintain the strength of the empire, Musa's efforts to prepare successors reflected a strategic understanding of political continuity. Despite the stability of his later reign, Musa remained aware of the empire's vulnerabilities. The size of Mali meant that distant regions required continuous support. Trade routes passing through contested territories needed protection. Environmental fluctuations could affect agriculture. Musa addressed these challenges through careful planning, trusted administrators, and investments in local infrastructure. His leadership maintained coherence across the empire despite its vast geography. As Musa advanced in age, chroniclers noted a subtle shift in his priorities. He spent more time reviewing manuscripts, consulting with scholars, and discussing legal matters. His deepened interest in the intellectual life of the empire reflected not only personal growth, but also an understanding that learning would outlast any single ruler. He supported the continued expansion of libraries, the training of judges, and the development of local schools. These investments ensured that even after his reign, Mali would remain a center of scholarship and governance. The final years of Musa's rule saw Mali at its peak, an empire with thriving trade, respected institutions, strong diplomacy, and a renowned reputation abroad. The stories circulating in distant lands, though sometimes exaggerated, reflected genuine achievements. Musa's influence was visible not only in gold, but in the enduring structures, libraries, markets, and networks that shaped everyday life. Reign created a foundation that would continue supporting Mali long after his death. Yet even during this gilded age, future challenges loomed beyond the horizon. For the moment, though, Musa presided over an empire at its height, confident, prosperous, and respected across continents. His legacy had already begun to take shape, carried by merchants, scholars, travelers, and mapmakers who shared stories of a ruler whose wealth seemed boundless and whose leadership reshaped the cultural and economic landscape of West Africa. Decline after greatness. The empire after Mansa Musa. As Musa entered the final years of his reign, the Mali Empire remained strong, confident, and deeply interconnected. Yet the very scale of its accomplishments carried within it pressures that required constant attention. Musa had governed with remarkable steadiness, guiding the empire through a phase of expansion, institutional development, and cultural flourishing. His leadership had unified trade networks stretching thousands of miles, elevated Timbuktu into a respected center of learning, and encouraged artisans, farmers, miners, and scholars to shape a society admired across continents. But while Mali under Musa reached heights few African empires had achieved, the transition from one ruler to the next would soon reveal how fragile even the greatest systems could become when not supported by equally capable successors. In the years leading to Musa's death, he devoted much of his time to ensuring administrative continuity. He had appointed his son, Mansa Musa, as his heir and gradually introduced him to the core responsibilities of governance. Musa oversaw certain legal matters, met with advisors, and observed the routines that sustained imperial order. Musa hoped that this gradual introduction to leadership would prepare his son to maintain the empire's systems of trade, law, diplomacy, and learning. Yet, even with careful preparation, rulers differed in temperament, experience, and judgment. The stability of Musa's reign had been set, anchored by a rare combination of vision, discipline, and understanding of the empire's diverse regions. Not all successors could replicate these qualities. Before his death in 1337, Musa spent increasing hours reviewing correspondence from governors across the empire, ensuring that communication remained strong. He examined reports on agricultural output, trade taxation, and the movement of caravans. His familiarity with the empire's internal rhythms allowed him to identify early signs of strain, whether in distant border regions or in cities experiencing sudden population growth. Even as age slowed his movements, his attention remained on the structures he had built, structures that required ongoing stewardship rather than passive inheritance. Musa died at a time when the empire still appeared steady, trade routes functioned reliably. Gold production continued. Scholars filled classrooms in Timbuktu and architecture flourished in cities such as Gao and Jen. The peaceful transition of power to Mansa Musa initially reassured people across the empire. Communities trusted the royal lineage and expected continuity. Diplomats from North Africa and the Middle East continued to send envoys, assuming Mali's stability would remain unchanged. Yet beneath this surface, pressures slowly formed. Magon by many accounts lacked the steady discipline that had defined his father's reign. While he respected the scholars, judges, and governors who served the empire, he struggled to maintain the same level of oversight. Administrative routines weakened. Communication between regions lost consistency, and responses to emerging challenges became slower. None of these changes occurred dramatically. Rather, they unfolded gradually in small disruptions that accumulated over time. One of the most significant challenges concerned the empire's military organization. Musa had prioritized the maintenance of secure trade routes, understanding that the economy depended on the safe passage of caravans. Under Magan, military coordination became less consistent. Patrols were not always deployed on time, and certain border regions received fewer resources. This gradual erosion of oversight created openings for rival powers, particularly the Sang Kingdom, which bordered Mali to the east and had long been both a trading partner and a potential competitor. The Sunhom, historically centered around Gao, had grown steadily stronger in the decades following Musa's acquisition of the region. While Mali still held authority, the local leaders of Siong maintained ambitions of independence. Mgan's reduced attention to eastern regions made it easier for these ambitions to develop quietly. Though the full resurgence of Sunh would occur generations later, the seeds of that future expansion were planted during this period of weakened oversight. Another factor contributing to Mali's gradual decline was the tendency of some officials to accumulate wealth privately rather than reinvesting resources into local infrastructure. Musa had maintained strict oversight of taxation and ensured that revenues supported public institutions. Under less vigilant leadership, some administrators saw opportunities to benefit personally. These practices, though not immediately destabilizing, weakened the trust communities had in the central government. The slow shift from shared prosperity to personal accumulation undermined the cohesion that had characterized Musa's reign. Trade networks, still active, also faced new pressures. The routes across the Sahara remained essential, but changes in climate affected certain oases, reducing water availability. Caravans adapted, but these environmental changes increased the importance of careful planning, something the weakened administration struggled to coordinate effectively. As travel became more challenging, merchants began to explore alternative routes, some bypassing Mali's central markets. Though this shift was modest, initially, over time, it contributed to reduced economic dominance. In the southern regions, gold production continued but became increasingly influenced by local leaders whose autonomy grew as central oversight weakened. Musa had understood that the stability of gold production required a careful balance between taxation and local control. Under Magan, this balance shifted subtly toward local authority. While this allowed communities greater independence, it also reduced the steady flow of resources to the central government, limiting its ability to respond to challenges or invest in public works. Culturally, the empire remained vibrant for years after Musa's death. Timbuktu continued to attract scholars and manuscripts circulated widely. Schools held classes, legal debates continued, and scribes copied texts that remain historically significant. These cultural institutions did not collapse immediately after Musa's reign. Instead, they endured for generations, supported by communities that valued learning. Many of the buildings, laws, and educational practices Musa had established remained central to daily life. Even as political systems weakened, the cultural legacy persisted. Diplomacy, however, experienced a gradual shift. Foreign envoys noted increased delay in administrative responses and some perceived uncertainty. Where Musa's leadership had once offered clarity, while Mali continued to command respect, the sense of inevitability surrounding its dominance slowly diminished. Other powers in the region, particularly Shanghai, saw opportunities to expand their influence. Despite these emerging challenges, it is important to recognize that Mali did not collapse suddenly after Musa's death. The empire remained significant for decades. Communities continued to trade, learn, and worship. Scholars still produced manuscripts and merchants still crossed the desert with goods essential to the economy. Musa's structures were resilient enough to endure beyond his lifetime. The decline unfolded gradually, shaped by leadership differences, regional ambitions, shift in trade routes, and environmental pressures. As time passed, the memory of Musa's reign took on a particular clarity. Chroniclers recorded his pilgrimage, his architectural achievements, and his investments in learning. Market traders continued telling stories of his generosity in Cairo. Mapmakers used his image to symbolize Africa's wealth. Scholars described him as a ruler who used prosperity to support both spiritual and intellectual life. In contrast, the reigns that followed lacked the same combination of vision and discipline, allowing gradual decline to settle across regions once strengthened by unified leadership. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, Sanghi regained momentum, eventually growing strong enough to challenge Mali's authority more directly. Internal administrative issues, combined with shifting external pressures, made it increasingly difficult for Mali to maintain control over distant regions. The empire's vastness, once a symbol of its strength, now created vulnerabilities for rulers unable to manage its many responsibilities. By the time Portuguese sailors reached West African coasts in the late 15th century, the Mali Empire had lost much of its former dominance. Its territories had contracted, trade routes had diversified, and local leaders asserted authority more independently. The golden manuscripts that had once symbolized the empire's height remained, but the structures that unified the empire under Musa's leadership had weakened. Mali gradually transitioned from a continental power to one of several regional states, each navigating the new trade networks emerging along the Atlantic coast. Yet even in decline, Mali's legacy endured. Timbuktu continued to serve as a center of learning, and its manuscripts, copied during and after Musa's reign, offered insights into law, astronomy, mathematics, and history. Scholars preserved knowledge that would contribute to Africa's intellectual heritage long after the empire's political power waned. The buildings constructed under Musa's guidance stood as reminders of a period when architecture, trade, and scholarship worked together to shape a thriving society. The later centuries of Mali's history underscored an enduring truth that empires rise and fall, not through sudden transformation, but through long processes shaped by leadership, environment, trade, and cultural resilience. Musa's reign represented one of the most remarkable moments in this long trajectory, a high point in which the empire used its wealth not only to command attention, but to build institutions that would outlast political change. In the centuries that followed, historians, travelers, and mapmakers continued to recall Musa's achievements. They described him as the wealthiest ruler of his time, but also as a patron of learning and a builder of cities. His legacy, shaped by fact, and enriched by memory, became a defining feature of West African history. What survived ultimately was not only the story of an empire's decline, but the enduring impact of a ruler whose vision transformed a region and whose actions echoed across continents. The legacy of Mansa Musa. Long after the Mali Empire passed its age of glory, and long after the power of later kings faded into the shifting patterns of West African history, the memory of Mansa Musa remained steady, vivid, and infused with the details that had shaped his extraordinary reign. His legacy extended far beyond the borders of the empire he had governed. It influenced not only the cultural foundations of Mali, but also the ways in which Africa appeared in the imagination of scholars, merchants, mapmakers, and travelers across continents. To understand his legacy is to recognize how one ruler's decisions rooted in faith, economic insight, and cultural investment could endure across centuries. One of the most far-reaching Set. Aspects of Musa's legacy involve the way the world perceived Africa. Before his pilgrimage, many regions beyond North Africa possessed limited knowledge of the West African interior. Musa's journey changed that dramatically. The scale of his caravan, the wealth he distributed, and the diplomatic encounters he conducted transformed global understanding of the region. Mapmakers in Europe, who had previously depicted Africa with minimal detail, began to include Mali prominently. The Catalan Atlas set of 1375, for example, portrayed Musa holding a golden orb and seated on a throne, an image that symbolized Mali as a land of prosperity and order. This depiction was not merely decorative. It signaled a shift in how Africa was imagined in the wider world. For centuries thereafter, scholars and travelers referred to Musa as one of the wealthiest individuals in recorded history. Although such claims relied partly on narrative exaggeration, they reflected genuine recognition of Mali's abundant resources and Musa's ability to harness them. Later historians, economists, and cultural commentators would revisit these accounts, noting that Musa's wealth mattered less for its numerical value and more for how he used it to strengthen scholarship, promote stability, and support religious life across the empire. Within Mali, the memory of Musa shaped local traditions. Families recounted stories of the pilgrimage, describing how gold distributed in Cairo had rippled across continents. Elders told of the mosques and schools built during his reign, and scholars preserved his contributions through written commentaries. For many, Musa symbolized a time when prosperity and learning flourished together, a time when wealth served not only the court, but the broader population. Even as political power shifted to other regions, this cultural memory remained, anchoring the region's identity in a history of intellectual and economic achievement. Another dimension of Musa's legacy involved the continuity of trade networks he had strengthened. Even after the empire's decline, caravans continued crossing the Sahara, relying on routes that had been fortified during his reign. Merchants carried goods between West Africa and North Africa, and the Niger River remained a vital artery of commerce. Although political control shifted over time, the structures supporting trade markets, resting points, and local partnerships survived, sustained by the habits and expectations established during Mali's period of prosperity. In reflecting on his legacy, it is also important to recognize that Musa's achievements unfolded within the context of a diverse and dynamic region. His decisions were shaped by the knowledge of local communities, the skills of miners and traders, the wisdom of scholars, and the craftsmanship of builders. Musa did not create Mali's wealth. He organized it, understood it, and ensured that it supported cultural and intellectual growth. His reign demonstrated how leadership rooted in long-term understanding could transform an empire. Yet, even as his legacy remained strong, it existed alongside the reality that no empire is immune to change. The decline that followed his reign illustrated how fragile political structures can become without continuous oversight. But the survival of manuscripts, architectural styles, and cultural memory shows that another kind of durability, one rooted in learning and identity, can outlast political power. In modern times, historians, economists, and educators continue to revisit Musa's life. His name appears in lists of the world's wealthiest individuals, but increasingly the focus shifts toward his contributions to African intellectual history, urban development, and cross-cultural exchange. He serves as a reminder that Africa has long been home to complex societies whose influence extended far beyond their borders. His story offers a counterpoint to narrow histories that overlook the richness of African civilizations. Today, descendants of the regions that once formed the Mali Empire still hear stories of Musa's pilgrimage, his generosity, and his vision. Timbuktu's manuscripts, preserved through centuries of change, continue to attract scholars who study their insights. The Jinga Rubber Mosque remains an enduring landmark, and the Catalan Atlas, with its depiction of Musa holding a golden orb, still symbolizes the global recognition he received during and after his lifetime. In remembering him, people recognize not only a ruler of immense wealth, but a leader who understood the deeper purposes of prosperity. He used gold to build schools, support scholars, enhance religious life, and strengthen the foundations of a thriving society. His reign became a defining era in West African history, shaping how future generations understood their cultural heritage. The legacy of Mansa Musa reflects a broader truth that the impact of a ruler is measured not only in the wealth they command but in the institutions they build, the knowledge they preserve, and the stability they create. Musa's life illustrated these principles clearly. His story continues to influence how historians understand Africa's past, how educators teach global history, and how communities across West Africa connect with their heritage. In this way, Mansa Musa's reign endures quietly, steadily, and with the same sense of clarity and purpose that characterized his leadership.